The permanent crimson storms of Caldara Prime raged overhead as Captain Alara Thorne watched the enemy forces gather across the Badlands. The swirling clouds cast an eerie red glow over the battlefield, turning the desert sand into a sea of blood. Through her tactical scope, she could make out the banners of Virel fluttering in the harsh wind. They were led by Prince Kalen Voss himself, a rare appearance for the heir of their rival city-state. "He's bold today," Lieutenant Maris remarked beside her, the wind whipping her dark braids against her armor. "Coming all this way to lead the raid himself." Alara lowered her scope, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of Zephyr's Edge, the ancestral blade that had been passed down through generations of her family. Its familiar weight against her hip was reassuring. "Bold or desperate," Alara replied, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that had earned her command of the Stormguard elite. "Virel's water reserves must be lower than our intelligence suggested." Maris nodded grimly. "Our scouts report they've brought siege engines. They mean to break through Red Dune Pass and reach the western aquifers." Alara stood tall, the weathered armor of the Stormguard catching the crimson light. As commander, her armor bore the additional etching of storm clouds, a symbol of her responsibility to protect Arden, their home city-state, from any who would threaten it. "Then we stop them here," she said, drawing Zephyr's Edge. The blade gleamed with an almost ethereal quality, its metal forged with lost techniques that made it both impossibly sharp and legendarily durable. Along its length, ancient runes glowed faintly, reminders of the code that bound its wielder. "Prepare the Stormguard for engagement. We hold the high ground and the pass." As her lieutenants moved to relay her orders, Alara remained at the overlook, studying the battlefield. The ancient blood oath laws were seldom invoked in modern warfare. Most commanders preferred to kill their enemies outright, rather than risk the complications of blood touching their blades. But Zephyr's Edge was different. The ancestral weapon was said to bind its wielder to those codes, whether they wished it or not. Alara had always respected the old ways. The discipline of the Stormguard was built upon traditions stretching back centuries, but she had never been forced to confront the full implications of the blood oath. If an enemy's blood touched your blade, while they still lived, you became their sworn protector, until the life debt was repaid. It was a relic of more honorable times, when warriors fought with codes beyond mere victory and defeat. In the modern age of warfare on Caldara Prime, few adhered to such principles. The perpetual struggle for resources, especially water, had stripped away many of the old, honorable practices. The horns of battle sounded, pulling Alara from her thoughts. She turned to see her forces assembled, the 50 elite warriors of the Stormguard, alongside 200 regular troops of Arden. They were outnumbered nearly 2 to 1, but the narrow pass and their elevated position would even the odds. "Stormguard," she called out, raising Zephyr's Edge high. "Today, we fight not just for Arden's water, but for her future. Hold this pass, and our children will drink deep for another season." A cheer rose from her troops as Alara took her position at the vanguard. The enemy forces were advancing rapidly, now their siege engines rumbling across the desert floor, kicking up clouds of red dust. "Archers ready," Alara commanded. "Target their forward line, fire at will." A hail of arrows arced through the crimson sky, finding their marks among the front ranks of Virel's forces. The battle had begun. The clash of armies echoed across the Badlands as Virel's forces struck against the defenders of Arden. The narrow confines of Red Dune Pass channeled the attackers, forcing them to funnel through where Alara's forces could cut them down more efficiently. For the first hour, it seemed the defenders might hold without much difficulty. Then the siege engines came into range. "Take cover," Alara shouted, as the first volley of flaming projectiles soared overhead. They crashed into the defensive barriers the Stormguard had erected, shattering wood and igniting the dry brush that grew along the pass. "They're targeting our eastern flank," Maris called out, pointing to where Virel's forces were beginning to concentrate. "They're going to try to push through there." Alara saw it immediately, a tactical maneuver to create a weak point. and leading the charge was none other than Prince Kalen himself, his distinctive armor gleaming even through the dust and smoke of battle. "Hold the line," Alara commanded. "Stormguard with me. We reinforce the eastern approach." She led her elite troops through the chaos of battle, cutting down 3 of Varel's soldiers who tried to intercept her. Zephyr's Edge moved like an extension of her arm, each strike precise and lethal. The ancient blade seemed to sing as it sliced through the air, leaving trails of light in its wake. As they reached the eastern flank, Alara saw that the situation was dire. The barriers were breached, and Varel's soldiers were pushing through the gap. At their head was Prince Kalen, his twin short swords a blur as he engaged 2 ardent defenders at once. Alara had heard stories of Kalen's prowess in battle, but had never witnessed it herself. The prince fought with a fluid grace that belied his royal upbringing. He was no pampered heir who led from the back. He was a warrior who had earned the respect of his troops. "Secure the breach," Alara ordered her stormguard. "I'll handle the prince." Without waiting for acknowledgement, she charged forward, Zephyr's Edge held high. Kalen dispatched his opponents, just as Alara reached him. Their eyes met across the battlefield, hers steely with determination, his widening with recognition. Captain Thorn," he said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips, despite the chaos around them. "I was hoping to cross blades with you today." "Your Highness," Alara replied, her tone formal, despite the circumstances. "You should have stayed in Virel. This raid will fail, and you risk too much by being here." Kalen's smile only widened. "My people thirst, Captain. I would not ask them to risk what I would not risk myself." With that, he lunged forward, his twin blades moving in a complex pattern designed to overwhelm her defenses. But Alara had not become commander of the Stormguard through luck. She parried his strikes with precision, Zephyr's Edge gleaming as it met his swords again and again. Around them, the battle raged on, but for Alara and Kalen, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them, 2 elite warriors testing each other's skill in the crucible of combat. "You fight well," Kalen acknowledged as they circled each other after the initial exchange. "The stories of the Stormguard's captain do you justice." "Save your breath for fighting," Alara replied, though she could not help but respect his skill. Had he been born in Arden, he would have made a fine addition to the Stormguard. Their dance continued, blades flashing in the crimson light of Caldara's perpetual storms. For every attack Kalen launched, Alara had a counter. For every defense she mounted, he found a new angle of assault. They were evenly matched, and in another context, it might have been beautiful to witness. But this was war, and Alara could not afford to admire her enemy, no matter how skillful. She redoubled her efforts, drawing on techniques passed down through generations of Stormguard commanders. She began to push Kalen back, step by step, toward the edge of the battlefield. The prince's expression changed from confidence to concern as he realized he was losing ground. In desperation, he attempted a daring maneuver, feinting to the left before spinning to strike from the right. It was the opening Alara had been waiting for. As he committed to the move, she stepped inside his guard and brought Zephyr's Edge across in a powerful slash. The blade connected with Kalen's face, cutting a deep gash from his right temple down across his cheek. The prince staggered backward, blood flowing freely from the wound. His hand went to his face, coming away crimson. For a moment, his eyes met Alara's, filled with shock and something else, a grudging respect. Then, he collapsed to his knees, his swords falling from his grasp. Alara stepped forward, Zephyr's Edge, poised to deliver a final, merciful strike. But as she raised her blade, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A single drop of Kalen's blood had landed on the edge of her sword, and the ancient runes etched into the metal were glowing brighter than she had ever seen them. The blood oath had been invoked. Before she could process what this meant, a cry went up from Virel's forces. Their leader had fallen. The tide of battle immediately shifted as the enemy troops began a chaotic retreat, abandoning their siege engines in their haste to escape. Alara stood frozen, staring at her blade, and the unconscious prince at her feet. The implications were staggering. By the ancient code that bound the wielder of Zephyr's Edge, she was now compelled to protect Prince Kalen, her sworn enemy, until his life debt was repaid. "Captain." Maris jogged up to her, breathless from battle but exultant. "They're retreating, we've won the—" Her voice trailed off as she saw the prince on the ground and the expression on Alara's face. "What is it? What's wrong?" Alara slowly sheathed her blade, the weight of it suddenly seeming much heavier than before. "His blood touched Zephyr's Edge," she said quietly. Maris's eyes widened as she understood the implications. "The blood oath," she whispered. "But surely you don't intend to honor such an archaic tradition. He's the enemy, Alara. Finish him and be done with it." Alara looked down at the unconscious prince, his blood still seeping into the red sand of the battlefield. She had always prided herself on her adherence to the codes and traditions that guided the Storm Guard. Could she abandon those principles now, when they became inconvenient? "Gather a medical team," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We're taking him back to Arden." "Captain, you can't be serious," Maris protested. "The council will never approve of this. He's the heir of Virel." "And now he's under my protection," Alara replied firmly. "By the oath that binds Zephyr's Edge, I am his guardian until his debt is repaid. I will not forsake that duty, Maris, even if it's to an enemy." Maris looked as though she wanted to argue further, but thought better of it. She had served under Alara long enough to know when her commander's mind was made up. "As you command, Captain," she said, her tone making it clear she disagreed with the decision. "But this will have consequences." Alara nodded, her gaze still on the fallen prince. "I know," she said softly. "Believe me, I know." As the medical team arrived to tend to Kalen, Alara looked out across the battlefield. Virel's forces were in full retreat, leaving their dead and wounded behind. It was a victory for Arden, but for Alara, it felt hollow. The true battle, she suspected, was only just beginning. The journey back to Arden was tense. Alara had ordered a stretcher for the unconscious prince, and she rode alongside it, keeping a vigilant eye on both the prisoner and her own troops. She could feel the disapproving stares of her storm guard, especially Maris, who rode at the rear of the procession, her posture rigid with disapproval. The crimson storms grew more intense as they approached the city-state of Arden. The massive walls rose before them, built from the same red stone that characterized much of Caldara Prime's landscape. Atop these fortifications, advanced defense systems, a blend of ancient techniques and more modern technology, stood ready to repel any aggression. As they approached the main gate, Alara could see a delegation waiting for them. Word of their victory and her decision had clearly preceded them. "Captain Thorne." Counselor Solon greeted her as the gates swung open. The elderly statesman's face was impassive, but Alara could detect a hint of concern in his eyes as they fell on the stretcher carrying Prince Kalen. "I see the reports were accurate." "Counselor," Alara acknowledged with a respectful nod. "We successfully repelled Virel's forces at Red Dune Pass. They've retreated back across the Badlands. And yet you bring their prince into our city," Solon observed, his tone carefully neutral. "May I ask why?" Alara dismounted, standing tall, despite her exhaustion from battle. "His blood touched Zephyr's Edge in combat," she explained. "The blood oath has been invoked. By our ancient laws, I am now bound to protect him until his life debt is repaid." Murmurs ran through the assembled council members and city guard. The blood oath was rarely invoked in modern warfare, and never with someone of such high rank from an enemy state. "I see," Solon said after a moment. "The council will want to discuss this matter immediately. In the meantime, where do you propose we keep the prince?" "In the Citadel healing chambers," Alara replied without hesitation. "Under my personal guard. His wounds need treatment, and I will ensure he poses no threat to Arden." Solon studied her face, perhaps looking for any sign of doubt or weakness. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "Very well, Captain. But be aware that not everyone will understand or accept your adherence to the old ways. There will be those who call for his execution oath or no oath. I'm prepared for that, counselor, Alara said firmly. But I will not forsake my duty, nor the traditions that have guided the Stormguard for generations. Then go, Solon said, stepping aside. Tend to your ward. The council will convene at dusk. Alara nodded and remounted her steed, leading the procession through the streets of Arden toward the central citadel. The citizens who had gathered to celebrate their victory fell silent as they saw the enemy prince being carried through their midst. Some looked confused, others angry. Alara kept her gaze forward, her face a mask of resolve. The citadel of Arden rose at the city's center, a towering structure of red stone and metal that housed both the military command and the governing council. Its upper levels caught the perpetual crimson light of Caldara's storms, making it appear as though the building itself was ablaze. Once inside, Alara personally oversaw the transfer of Prince Kalen to the healing chambers. The citadel's chief physician, a stern woman named Dr. Varen, examined the prince's wound with clinical detachment. A clean cut, she observed. Deep, but not life-threatening. He'll have a significant scar, but he should recover fully. How long until he regains consciousness? Alara asked. Hours, perhaps a day, Dr. Varen replied. I'll administer healing compounds to speed his recovery and prevent infection. She hesitated, then added, Captain, may I speak freely? Alara nodded. Are you certain about this course of action? Invoking the blood oath with the air of Varel could have far-reaching consequences. The council will debate and argue as they always do, Alara interjected. But the oath is clear, Doctor. My blade tasted his blood and he lives. I am bound to protect him until the debt is repaid. Dr. Varen sighed but nodded. As you say, Captain. I'll tend to his wound. But I suggest you prepare your arguments for the council. They won't be as easily convinced of the wisdom of this decision. After ensuring that Kalen was secure and under proper medical care, Alara posted trusted Stormguard soldiers at the entrance to the healing chambers. She selected those she knew would follow her orders without question, deliberately excluding Maris and others who had openly displayed their disapproval. As she was making the arrangements, Maris approached her in the corridor outside the healing chambers. "A word, Captain!" the lieutenant requested, her voice tightly controlled. Alara nodded, leading her second-in-command to a more private alcove nearby. "Speak your mind, Maris." "This is madness," Maris said bluntly, once they were alone. "Blood oath or no, he is the enemy. His forces were trying to steal our water, our very lifeblood, and now you bring him into our stronghold and tend to his wounds." "I follow the code that has guided warriors on Caldara for centuries," Alara replied evenly. "The same code that you swore to uphold when you joined the Stormguard." "The code is outdated," Maris argued. "It was meant for a different time when honor meant something in warfare. Now it's just survival. Do you think Varel would show the same mercy if our positions were reversed?" "Perhaps not," Alara conceded. "But that is why we are not them. The Stormguard stands for something beyond mere victory, Maris. We maintain the old ways because they remind us of our humanity in a world that grows more desperate by the season." Maris shook her head, frustration evident in every line of her body. "And what if adhering to these ancient traditions costs us everything? What if, while you protect him, his forces regroup and attack again? What then, Captain?" "Then we will face that challenge when it comes," Alara said firmly. "But I will not forsake my oath, not even for Arden." "Many will call that treason," Maris warned. "Then they misunderstand what it means to be Stormguard," Alara replied. "We defend Arden, yes, but we also uphold the principles that make Arden worth defending." Maris looked as though she wanted to say more, but instead snapped to attention. "As you command, Captain," she said formally. "Will there be anything else?" Alara searched her lieutenant's face, seeing the conflict there. Maris was a good soldier, one of the best, but her worldview was more pragmatic than Alara's. She valued results over principles, survival over tradition. Prepare the storm guard for potential retaliation, Alara ordered. Double the patrols along our borders and maintain vigilance. Virel will be reeling from this defeat, but they may not wait long to strike again. Yes, Captain, Maris replied, turning to leave. And Maris, Alara called after her. The lieutenant paused, looking back. I understand your concerns, but I need your support now more than ever. The Storm Guard must present a united front, especially in times of uncertainty. Maris's expression softened slightly. You have my loyalty, Captain, always. But I fear for Arden, and for you. With that, she departed, leaving Alara alone with her thoughts, and the weight of her decision pressing down upon her. As dusk approached, Alara prepared to face the council. She cleaned the blood and grime of battle from her armor-polished Zephyr's edge until it gleamed, and arranged her thoughts carefully. She would need all her diplomatic skill to navigate the coming confrontation. But before she could leave for the council chambers, a guard arrived with urgent news. Captain, the prince is awake. Alara hurried to the healing chambers. When she entered, she found Prince Kalen sitting upright on his bed, a hand touching the bandage that covered the left side of his face. His eyes, a startling blue against the red-tinged light of the room, fixed on her immediately. Captain Thorne, he said, his voice slightly hoarse but steady. I must admit this isn't how I imagined our next meeting would go. Am I your prisoner? Alara approached, maintaining a respectful distance. Not exactly, Your Highness. You are under my protection. Kalen's eyebrows rose in surprise, pulling at his bandage and causing him to wince. Your protection? I was under the impression we were enemies. We are, Alara admitted. But during our combat, your blood touched my ancestral blade. By the ancient codes of Caldara, I am now bound to protect you until your life debt is repaid. Kalen stared at her for a long moment before letting out a short, incredulous laugh. The blood oath, that's an archaic tradition. I didn't think anyone still honored such things. The Storm Guard does, Alara replied simply. I do. The prince studied her face, perhaps looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, his expression grew thoughtful. So, what happens now, Captain? Do you intend to keep me here in Arden indefinitely? My people will come for me, you realize. I'm aware, Alara said. And I must now go before our council to explain my decision to bring you here. In the meantime, you will remain under guard in these chambers. You will be treated with the respect due your rank, but make no mistake, attempt to escape or harm anyone within these walls, an oath or no oath, I will stop you. Kalen nodded slowly. Fair enough, and when this life debt is repaid, what then? Alara met his gaze steadily. Then we return to being what we were, defenders of our respective city-states. Enemies, Kalen clarified. If necessary, Alara acknowledged. Though perhaps this unexpected situation might lead to something else. Peace, maybe. Kalen's laugh was bitter this time. Peace. In a world where we fight over every drop of water. That's a pleasant fantasy, Captain, but not a realistic one. Before Alara could respond, the door opened again and Counselor Solon entered. Captain Thorne, the council awaits. He announced, his gaze moving to Kalen. Prince Voss, I trust you are being treated well. Well enough for someone who just had his face sliced open, Kalen replied dryly. Though I admit being healed by those you were just fighting is disorienting. Solon's expression remained neutral. The ways of the Blood Oath are not easily understood by those who have not studied them. But rest assured, while you remain under Captain Thorne's protection, no harm will come to you from any citizen of Arden. He turned back to Alara. We should go, Captain. The council grows impatient. Alara nodded and turned to leave, but Kalen's voice stopped her. Captain, he called. When she looked back, his expression was unreadable. Good luck with your council. I suspect you'll need it. With a brief nod of acknowledgement, Alara followed Solon out of the healing chambers and toward what promised to be one of the most challenging confrontations of her career. The council chambers of Arden were designed to inspire awe and respect. Circular in shape with tiered seating that rose around a central speaking platform, The room was dominated by a massive skylight that captured the crimson glow of Caldara's perpetual storms. The effect was both beautiful and intimidating, especially for the person standing in the center, as Alara now was. The 5 senior counselors of Arden occupied the highest tier. Solon, as the eldest, sat in the center. To his right was Counselor Terra, head of resource management, and Counselor Drav, chief of defense. To his left sat Counselor Jens, responsible for internal affairs, and Counselor Veka, who oversaw relations with other city-states. Below them sat the junior counselors and representatives from Arden's various districts and guilds. The full council rarely convened except for matters of grave importance, which Alara supposed this was. Captain Alara Thorn. Solon began formally, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. You stand before this council to explain your decision to invoke the Blood Oath with Prince Kalen Voss of Virel and to bring an enemy combatant within our walls. Speak now and help us understand this unprecedented action. Alara took a deep breath, centering herself. She had faced enemy armies with less trepidation than she felt now, but she would not show weakness. Honorable counselors, she began, her voice strong and clear. Today at Red Dune Pass, the forces of Arden successfully repelled an attack by Virel. During this engagement, I personally faced Prince Kalen in combat. I bested him, inflicting a wound across his face, but in doing so his blood touched my ancestral blade, Zephyr's Edge. Murmurs ran through the assembled council members, but Alara continued. As keeper of this blade, I am bound by the ancient codes of Caldara. When an enemy's blood touches your weapon, and they yet live, you become their protector until the life debt is repaid. This is the Blood Oath, a tradition as old as our settlements on this world. Traditions evolve, Captain, Counselor Drav interjected. His scarred face and missing eye spoke of a lifetime of military service before joining the council. The Blood Oath may have made sense in the early days of colonization, when all settlements needed to cooperate to survive Caldara's harsh conditions. But we now live in an age of competition for dwindling resources. Virel is our enemy, not our ally. With respect, Counselor, Alara replied. It is precisely because resources are scarce that we must hold onto the principles that separate us from mere animals fighting over the last drops of water. The Stormguard has always been more than just Arden's military force. We are the guardians of its values, its traditions. Noble sentiments. Counselor Veka said, her tone making it clear she thought otherwise. The diplomatic chief was known for her pragmatic approach to inter-city relations. But, while you protect the enemy prince, what protects Arden from Virel's next attack, they will not honor your oath, Captain. My Stormguard stands ready to defend Arden as always, Alara assured her. My duty to the Blood Oath does not diminish my duty to our city-state. And if those duties conflict, Counselor Terra asked. If protecting the prince means endangering Arden, it was the question Alara had been dreading because she wasn't entirely sure of her answer. She chose her words carefully. The oath compels me to protect his life, not his agenda. Should Prince Kalen attempt to harm Arden or its citizens, I would stop him without killing him if possible. And if not possible, Solon pressed. Alara met the elder counselor's gaze directly. Then, I would do what is necessary, oath or no oath. But I believe it will not come to that. Why, Counselor Jens spoke for the first time. The internal affairs chief was younger than the others, known for his sharp intelligence. What makes you think the prince won't attempt to escape or sabotage us from within at the first opportunity? Because he is a leader, Alara said simply. In battle he led from the front, risking himself alongside his troops. That speaks to his character. He may be our enemy, but he is not without honor. The council members exchanged glances, some skeptical, others thoughtful. There is another matter to consider, Solon said after a moment. Word has reached us that Virel has sent envoys. They will arrive tomorrow with an offer, political concessions, and resources in exchange for their prince's safe return. This was news to Alara, and she took a moment to process its implications. They seek to buy his freedom rather than fight for it. It seems so, Solon confirmed. Which raises an interesting question, Captain. Would accepting such an offer satisfy the blood oath? Would it constitute repayment of the life debt? Alara frowned, considering. The ancient texts concerning the blood oath were not always clear on how a life debt could be repaid. Traditionally, it required some act of equivalent value, the saved life, saving the protector's life in turn, or providing some service or sacrifice of comparable worth. I cannot say with certainty, she admitted finally. The oath is spiritual as much as it is legalistic. I would need to consult the texts and meditate on the matter. Do so quickly, Counselor Drav advised, because holding the prince indefinitely is not an option. Sooner or later, Virel will run out of patience with diplomacy. In the meantime, Solon said, the council has decided that Prince Kalen will remain under your protection, Captain Thorn, but with restrictions. He is to be confined to the guest quarters adjacent to the healing chambers with guards at all times. He is not to have access to any communications or sensitive areas of the citadel. It was a reasonable compromise and more than Alara had expected. She bowed her head in acknowledgement. Thank you, counselors. I will ensure these conditions are met. Furthermore, Solon continued, you will receive Virel's envoys personally alongside Counselor Veka, assess their offer, and determine if it might satisfy the requirements of the blood oath. And if it doesn't, Alara asked. Solon's expression was grave. Then we will reconvene to discuss alternatives. But understand this, Captain. The Council's patience is not infinite. One way or another, this situation must be resolved before it endangers Arden. With that, the Council session was adjourned. As Alara left the chambers, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her more heavily than ever. She had managed to buy time, but the real challenges were only beginning. As she made her way back to the healing chambers to inform Kalen of the Council's decision, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than a simple invocation of an ancient oath. The way Virel had so quickly offered concessions was unusual. Typically, they would have threatened force first. Something else was at play here, and Alara was determined to discover what it was before it threatened everything she had sworn to protect both her city and now her unlikely ward. When Alara returned to the healing chambers, she found Prince Kalen standing by the window, looking out at the crimson-lit cityscape of Arden. He had been provided with simple but dignified clothing to replace his battle-damaged attire, and his wound had been freshly dressed. He turned as she entered, his expression guarded. "Am I to be executed at dawn, Captain?" He asked, his tone light despite the serious question. "Or has your council found some creative punishment for the audacity of bleeding on your sword?" "Neither," Alara replied, closing the door behind her. "You are to be moved to guest quarters. You'll be comfortable but guarded at all times." Kalen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Guest quarters? I expected a cell at best." "The blood oath demands proper treatment," Alara explained. "And you are, regardless of our conflict, a prince." "How civilized," Kalen remarked, turning back to the window. After a moment of silence, he added, "Your city is beautiful in its way, different from Virel, more unified." Alara moved to stand beside him, following his gaze out over Arden. The city-state was built in concentric rings, with the citadel at its center. Each ring served a specific purpose: military governance, crafts, agriculture, all working in harmony. The outer wall, massive and formidable, encircled it all, a constant reminder of the threats that lurked beyond. "We value order," she said simply. "Structure gives us strength in a chaotic world." "While Virel values individual initiative," Kalen countered. "Different approaches to survival." "Yet both our city-states fight for the same resources," Alara noted. "Which brings me to something else I must tell you. Your people have sent envoys. They will arrive tomorrow with an offer of concessions in exchange for your safe return." Kalen turned to her sharply, his expression suddenly intense. Who have they sent?" The urgency in his voice caught Alara off guard. "I don't know the specific envoys. Does it matter?" Kalen, seemed to catch himself, his features smoothing into a more neutral expression. "Mere curiosity," he said, but Alara didn't believe him. There was something he wasn't saying. "Your Highness," she said formally, "I am bound to protect you, but that duty would be easier if we were honest with each other. If there is something I should know about these envoys or Varel's motives, tell me now." The prince studied her face for a long moment, perhaps weighing his options. Finally he sighed. "Not all in Virel are as united as your ordered city captain. There are factions, political rivalries. My father's health is failing, and my position as heir has made me both powerful and vulnerable." "You believe these envoys might not have your best interests at heart," Alara surmised. "Let's just say that some in Virel might see my current predicament as an opportunity rather than a crisis," Kalen said carefully. "Whether for personal advancement or for leverage in our internal politics." Alara considered this new information. It complicated an already complex situation. "Is there someone specific you suspect, a name I should watch for among the envoys?" Kalen hesitated, then shook his head. "I've said too much already. Virel's internal matters should remain internal." "Even if they might affect your safety," Alara pressed. "I cannot protect you effectively if I'm blind to potential threats." "You misunderstand the nature of politics in Virel, Captain," Kalen said with a bitter smile. "Direct threats are rare. It's the subtle maneuvers, the calculated omissions, the carefully crafted agreements that pose the real danger. Watch the envoys closely, by all means, but don't expect them to show their true intentions openly." Alara found his cryptic warnings frustrating, but she recognized that he was unlikely to say more for now. She would need to earn his trust, a strange notion, given their positions as enemies. "Very well," she said finally. "But know this by the blood oath, I am sworn to protect you from all threats, regardless of their source. That includes threats from your own people if necessary." Kalen looked genuinely surprised at this declaration. "You would go so far, even if it meant opposing Virel's official representatives?" "The oath makes no exceptions," Alara stated firmly. "My duty is to ensure your safety until the life debt is repaid, regardless of who might threaten it." For the first time since their confrontation on the battlefield, Kalen's expression softened, showing something close to respect. "You take this oath very seriously, don't you? It's not just politics or manipulation. You genuinely believe in these ancient traditions." "I do," Alara confirmed. "The Stormguard has always been guided by the old codes. They give meaning to our service beyond mere victory or defeat." "A noble sentiment," Kalen said, and this time there was no mockery in his tone. "Rare in these desperate times." Before Alara could respond, a knock came at the door. It was the guard detail she had assigned to escort Kalen to his new quarters. "It's time to move to your accommodations," she informed him. "I'll accompany you to ensure everything is suitable." Kalen nodded, his moment of openness already fading behind his princely composure. "Lead on, Captain. It seems I am in your hands for better or worse." As they made their way through the Citadel corridors, Ilara noticed how Kalen observed everything with keen interest: the layout, the guard positions, the defensive measures. It was what any capable military leader would do in enemy territory, but it reminded her that despite their unusual situation, he remained a potential threat. The guest quarters were spacious and comfortable, if not luxurious. A bedroom sitting area and private bathing chamber, all with windows that offered views of the city, but were too narrow to allow escape. The furnishings were simple, but of good quality, befitting a dignitary rather than a prisoner. "These will be your rooms for the duration of your stay," Alara explained, as Kalen examined the space. "Guards will be posted outside at all times. You may request books, food, or other reasonable comforts, but you will not be permitted to leave or communicate with anyone outside the Citadel without my presence." "Comfortable confinement, then," Kalen summarized. "Better than many alternatives, I suppose." "I'll return in the morning before the envoys arrive," Alara informed him. "If you need anything urgent in the meantime, the guards will alert me." Kalen nodded, then asked, May I make one request now, Captain? You may ask, Alara replied cautiously. I would like writing materials, the prince said. Parchment ink, something to occupy my mind during my stay. It seemed a harmless enough request, and denying it would be needlessly cruel. I'll have them brought to you, Alara agreed. As she turned to leave, Kalen called after her once more. Captain Thorne. She paused, looking back. His expression was solemn. Thank you for honoring the oath even when it would have been easier not to. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Rest well, Your Highness, she replied simply, and left him to settle into his new quarters. Outside, she gave final instructions to the guards, emphasizing that, while the prince was to be treated with respect, security was paramount. As she walked away, her mind was already turning to the meeting with Virel's envoys tomorrow, and the complex web of politics that seemed to be unfolding around what should have been a straightforward matter of traditional honor. The blood oath had bound her to protect Kalen, but she was beginning to suspect that the greatest threats to him, and perhaps to Arden as well, were far more subtle than swords and siege engines. That night, Alara found sleep elusive. She paced her private quarters in the Stormguard wing of the Citadel, her mind racing. The events of the day had set in motion something she couldn't fully comprehend yet, and the uncertainty troubled her. Alara had always been a woman of action, preferring direct confrontation to political maneuvering, but this situation demanded a different kind of strategy. Finally, accepting that rest would not come easily, she decided to consult the ancient texts regarding the blood oath. If she was to navigate this complex situation, she needed to understand fully the tradition that had created it. The Citadel's archive was deserted at this late hour. Alara nodded to the lone guard at the entrance and made her way to the section housing the oldest records of the Stormguard. Dust motes danced in the air as she carefully removed a leather-bound tome from its shelf, the Code of Zephyr, the definitive text on the traditions associated with her ancestral blade. For hours, she pored over the ancient writings, their archaic language sometimes requiring intense concentration to decipher. The blood oath was described in detail, its origins, dating back to the earliest days of settlement on Caldara Prime, when the harsh environment forced even rivals to sometimes aid one another for mutual survival. According to the text, the life debt could be repaid in various ways, but the most common was through some act of equivalent value, the saved life saving the protector's life in return. In some cases, a significant sacrifice or service to the protector's people could also satisfy the requirements of the oath. What troubled Alara was the passage describing what happened to those who broke the oath. The text spoke of a severance of spirit, a profound dishonor that would leave the oathbreaker hollow and bereft of purpose. Some interpreted this metaphorically, but the Stormguard had always taken such warnings literally. Breaking the blood oath was believed to irreparably damage one's spiritual essence. Alara closed the book with a heavy sigh. The Council's suggestion that Virel's political concessions might satisfy the oath seemed increasingly unlikely. The text emphasized that true repayment required personal sacrifice, or service, not merely political or material compensation. As she returned the tome to its shelf, Alara noticed another smaller volume partially hidden behind the others. Curious, she pulled it out. It was titled Technomantic Influences in Modern Warfare, a more recent work, judging by its condition. A phrase caught her eye as she flipped through it. The Blood Cabal's manipulation of traditional codes for technological advantage. She read further, her interest piqued. The text described a secretive group of technomancers who sought to harness the spiritual power of ancient traditions like the Blood Oath for their advanced war machines. According to the author, these technomancers had infiltrated several city-states, including Virel, influencing their military strategies and technological development. They supposedly saw the old traditions not as moral codes, but as potential energy sources for their experimental weapons. The book was clearly controversial. Marginalia indicated that many scholars dismissed its claims as conspiracy theories. But something about it resonated with Alara, particularly in light of Kalen's cryptic warnings about factions within Varel. She was so engrossed in the text that she almost didn't notice the approaching footsteps until they were upon her. Quickly, she returned the book to its hiding place and turned to find Lieutenant Maris standing in the archive doorway. "Couldn't sleep either," Maris asked, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I needed to consult the texts on the blood oath," Alara explained, moving away from the shelf. "To better understand what I've committed to." Maris nodded, stepping further into the room. "And have you found a convenient loophole that allows you to end this madness?" "It's not madness, Maris," Alara said firmly. "And no, I haven't. If anything, the texts confirm the seriousness of the oath." "And what of Arden?" Maris pressed. "While you protect the enemy prince who protects our city, if Varel attacks again—" "You do," Alara replied simply. "All of you. The Stormguard is more than just its Captain Maris. I trust you to lead in my absence if necessary." This seemed to take Maris aback. "You would place that responsibility on me?" "Who else?" Alara asked. "You're my second in command and one of the finest warriors I've ever fought alongside. The Stormguard respects you, as do I." Maris was silent for a moment, absorbing this. "I still think this oath is a mistake," she said finally, but her tone had softened. "But I will not let Arden fall while you attend to it. You have my word on that." "Thank you," Alara said sincerely. "That means more than you know." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them not entirely gone, but significantly lessened. "The envoys arrive tomorrow?" Maris asked eventually. Alara nodded. "Mid-morning, according to the council. I'm to receive them alongside Councillor Veka." "Be careful," Maris warned. "Veka is a skilled diplomat, but she prioritizes Arden's interests above all else. She may see the prince as a bargaining chip rather than the subject of a sacred oath." "I'm aware," Alara acknowledged. "Politics has never been my strength, but I'll navigate it as best I can." Maris hesitated, then added, "There are rumors among the troops. Some say you've been bewitched by the prince, or that there's more to your protection of him than just the blood oath." Alara raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" "I think you're frustratingly honorable to a fault," Maris replied, with a hint of a smile. "But not everyone knows you as I do. Be mindful of how your actions appear to others." It was sound advice, and Alara nodded her thanks. "I'll keep that in mind. Now we should both try to get some rest. Tomorrow promises to be challenging." As they parted ways, Alara found her thoughts returning to the book on technomancers. If there was any truth to its claims, the arrival of Varel's envoys might be more dangerous than anyone suspected. She made a mental note to observe them carefully, looking for any signs of unusual technology or hidden agendas. The blood oath had already complicated her life immensely, but Alara was beginning to suspect that it was merely the surface of a much deeper conspiracy, one that might threaten not just her or Prince Kalen, but the future of Arden itself. The morning dawned with Caldara's perpetual crimson storms, intensifying, battering the walls of Arden with fierce winds and occasional bursts of lightning. It was as if the planet itself was reflecting the tension building within the city-state. Alara rose early, donning her formal Stormguard armor, more ceremonial than the battle-worn set she had worn the previous day, but no less imposing. The polished plates gleamed in the red light, filtering through her quarters, and the emblem of the Stormguard, a stylized shield with a lightning bolt, stood out prominently on the breastplate. Zephyr's edge hung at her side, its weight a constant reminder of the oath that now dictated her actions. The blade seemed unusually warm against her hip, as if responding to the proximity of the one whose blood had touched it. After a brief meal, Alara made her way to Prince Kalen's quarters. The guards outside stood at attention as she approached. "Any issues during the night?" she inquired. "None, Captain," the senior guard reported. "The prince requested an early meal and has been quiet since." Alara nodded and entered after a brief knock. She found Kalen seated at a small desk, writing on the parchment she had provided him. He looked up as she entered, setting aside his quill. Captain Thorne, he greeted her, rising from his seat. You look formidable this morning. I take it the envoys are expected soon. Within the hour, Alara confirmed. I came to inform you of the protocol. You will not be present for the initial meeting, but if negotiations progress favorably, you may be summoned later. Kalen's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. And what would favorable negotiations entail exactly? My transfer back to Varel, in exchange for what water rights territory political concessions? That remains to be seen, Alara replied neutrally. But there is something I must ask you first. She paused, considering how to phrase her next question. Last night I came across references to a group called the Blood Cabal Technomancers, who allegedly seek to manipulate traditional codes like the Blood Oath for technological purposes. The text suggested they had infiltrated Varel's leadership. Kalen's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A tightening around the eyes, a momentary tensing of his shoulders. He knew something. Captain, he said carefully, you're venturing into dangerous territory with such questions. Those texts you found are considered fringe theories by most scholars. But not by you, Alara observed. Your reaction suggests otherwise. The prince moved to the window, gazing out at the storm-racked city. For a long moment he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost conspiratorial. There are elements within Varel's governance that have embraced certain technological advancements that some traditionalists find troubling. Whether they constitute a cabal is a matter of interpretation. And these advancements, Alara pressed, do they involve harnessing the power of ancient traditions, like the Blood Oath? Kalen turned to face her, his expression grave. Why do you think Varel has been so aggressive in its raids lately? It's not just about water, Captain. It's about power in all its forms. You're not answering my question directly, Alara noted. Because a direct answer could be dangerous for both of us, Kalen replied. But consider this. Why would Varel send envoys so quickly after my capture? Why offer concessions rather than threats? It's unprecedented in our long history of conflict. Alara had been wondering the same thing. You think these envoys represent this technological faction? I think, Kalen said carefully, that you should be very cautious in today's meeting. Watch for anything unusual devices, emblems, even turns of phrase that seem out of place. It was still frustratingly vague, but Alara sensed she wouldn't get more from him now. She nodded, accepting the warning for what it was. One more thing, she said. The Blood Oath texts indicate that the life debt can be repaid through an act of equivalent value, typically by saving the protector's life in return, or through some significant sacrifice or service to their people. Political concessions or ransoms don't align with the traditional requirements. Kalen seemed to consider this information thoughtfully. So, even if Varel offers Arden everything it desires, you would still be bound to me by this oath. Unless the Council finds some creative interpretation of the ancient texts. Yes, Alara confirmed. Which makes these negotiations complicated. Life on Caldara is rarely simple, Captain, Kalen said with a hint of resignation. I suggest you focus on learning what you can from these envoys. My status can be determined later. Alara studied him, trying to discern his true thoughts behind the princely facade. Was he genuinely concerned about hidden technomancers? Or was this a ploy to sow doubt and confusion among Arden's leadership? I'll return after the meeting, she informed him. In the meantime, continue to cooperate with the guards. It will make things easier for everyone. Kalen nodded, then gestured to the parchments on his desk. May I continue with my writing? It helps pass the time. What exactly are you writing? Alara asked, suddenly suspicious. Kalen smiled slightly. Personal reflections, Captain. Even prisoners or protected guests are entitled to their private thoughts. Alara hesitated, then nodded. Very well, but understand that anything you produce may be examined if deemed necessary for security. Of course, Kalen agreed readily. I would expect nothing less. With that, Ilara took her leave, her mind already turning to the upcoming meeting with Virel's envoys. Kaelin's warning had only heightened her concerns, but it had also given her a focus for her observations. If there were hidden technomancers among the delegation, she was determined to identify them. As she made her way to the formal reception hall where the meeting would take place, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more complex than a simple diplomatic negotiation. The Blood Oath had set events in motion that were rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control, and she was at the center of it all. The reception hall of Arden Citadel was a testament to the city-state's history and values. The stone walls were adorned with tapestries depicting significant moments from Arden's past, its founding during the early colonization of Caldara Prime, its survival through the Great Drought, and its victories in numerous conflicts with rival city-states. Councillor Veka was already present when Ilara arrived, dressed in formal diplomatic attire that managed to suggest both openness to negotiation and readiness for confrontation. Her silver-streaked dark hair was intricately braided, and she wore the symbol of Arden, a stylized water droplet encircled by a protective shield, prominently at her throat. Captain Thorne, Veka, greeted her with a formal nod. "I trust you're prepared for this meeting." "As much as possible," Ilara replied. "Though I admit diplomacy has never been my strongest domain." Veka's smile was thin but not unkind. "That's why I'm here. You represent the Blood Oath and Arden's military strength. I represent our diplomatic interests. Between us, we should manage these envoys effectively." Before Ilara could respond, the massive doors at the end of the hall opened, and a Citadel guard announced, "The envoys from Virel, Councillor Captain." 3 figures entered, and Ilara studied them carefully as they approached. The leader was immediately apparent, a tall, severe-looking woman, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. She wore the traditional diplomatic robes of Virel, deep blue with silver accents, but Ilara noticed an unusual emblem on her chest, a stylized gear, intersected by what looked like a bolt of energy. Flanking her were 2 men, both younger. One appeared to be a military officer, judging by his posture and the ceremonial sword at his hip. The other was more difficult to categorize. He wore scholar's robes, but the unusual devices attached to his belt suggested a technical or scientific specialty. "Councillor Veka, Captain Thorne." The woman greeted them with a formal bow. "I am Chancellor Lavina of Virel. These are Commander Jax and Technician Soren. We come seeking the return of our prince and heir." The titles confirmed Ilara's suspicions. This was not a standard diplomatic delegation. A chancellor outranked most envoys, suggesting the seriousness with which Virel viewed the situation. And the presence of a technician, rather than a traditional scholar or advisor, aligned with Kaelin's warnings about technomancers. "Arden welcomes you," Councillor Veka responded smoothly, "though the circumstances are unfortunate." "Indeed," Chancellor Lavina agreed, her gaze shifting to Ilara. "We understand that Prince Kaelin is being held due to some ancient tradition involving blood and blades. A quaint custom, but surely one that can be set aside in the interest of peace between our city-states." There was something dismissive in her tone that immediately put Ilara on edge. "The Blood Oath is more than a quaint custom, Chancellor," she replied firmly. "It is a binding spiritual obligation, particularly for the wielder of an ancestral blade like mine." The technician Soren leaned forward slightly at this, his interest visibly piqued. The ancestral blade that would be Zephyr's Edge, correct, one of the original settlement weapons, forged with techniques no longer fully understood. "You seem well informed about Arden's heirlooms," Ilara observed carefully. Soren smiled, an expression that didn't reach his calculating eyes. "I study such things, Captain. The intersection of ancient traditions and modern capabilities is fascinating." "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand," Councillor Veka interjected smoothly. "You've come with an offer for Prince Kaelin's return." Chancellor Lavina nodded. "Virel is prepared to be generous. We offer exclusive rights to the Northern Aquifer for 5 years, a reduction in our military presence along the shared border, and a significant one-time transfer of processed resources, metals, medicines, and technological components that Arden has traditionally lacked. It was an unexpectedly substantial offer, one that would significantly benefit Arden. Under normal circumstances, it would be difficult to refuse, but Alara couldn't help but feel there was something else at play. A generous proposal, Veka acknowledged. But I'm curious, why not simply mount a rescue mission or threaten military action? Such concessions are unprecedented in our long history of conflict. Commander Jack spoke for the first time, his voice gruff and direct. Prince Kalen is the rightful heir to Virel. His safe return is worth temporary sacrifices. And yet, Alara said, watching their reactions carefully, when he fell in battle, your forces retreated immediately. They made no attempt to recover him then. A flicker of something annoyance concern crossed the Chancellor's face before her diplomatic mask returned. Battlefield decisions are made in the moment, Captain. Retreat was the prudent choice to preserve our forces for another day. Or perhaps, Alara suggested, certain factions within Virel saw an opportunity in the prince's capture. The atmosphere in the hall instantly tensed. Commander Jax's hand moved subtly closer to his sword, while Technician Soren's expression sharpened with interest. What exactly are you implying, Captain? Chancellor Lavina asked, her voice dangerously soft. Counselor Veka shot Alara a warning glance, but Alara pressed on, trusting her instincts. I imply nothing, Chancellor. I merely observe that Virel's response to this situation has been unusual. It makes me wonder about the true motivations behind this generous offer. Our motivations are clear, the Chancellor replied coldly. We want our prince returned. The specifics of our internal politics are not relevant to these negotiations. They are if they affect Prince Kalen's safety, Alara countered. The blood oath compels me to protect him from all threats, including those that might come from his own people. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Commander Jax looked openly hostile now, while Technician Soren studied Alara with renewed interest, as if reassessing her. Finally, Chancellor Lavina spoke, her tone carefully controlled. Captain Thorn, you overstep. The prince's safety within Virel is not your concern, blood oath or no blood oath. Your obligation ends when he leaves Arden's territory. That's not how the oath works, Alara said firmly. It binds me to his protection until the life debt is repaid through equivalent action or sacrifice. Political concessions and resource transfers do not satisfy that requirement. The Chancellor's expression hardened. Then what would you have us do, Captain? What would satisfy this spiritual obligation of yours? Before Alara could respond, Counselor Veka intervened. Perhaps this is a discussion best continued after we've all had time to consider the various aspects of the situation. Arden's council will need to review Virel's offer in detail, and Captain Thorn should consult the ancient texts regarding acceptable forms of repayment for the blood oath. It was a diplomatic way to diffuse the growing tension, and Alara recognized that pressing further now would only damage the negotiations. She nodded in agreement. A reasonable suggestion, Chancellor Lavina conceded, though her gaze remained fixed on Alara. We will await your response, but understand that our offer is time-sensitive. Virel's generosity has limits. We understand, Veka assured her. In the meantime, you and your companions will be provided with suitable accommodations within the Citadel. Captain Thorn will escort you to meet briefly with Prince Kalen to confirm his well-being before you retire. This was news to Alara, but she maintained her composure. Allowing the envoys to see Kalen made sense from a diplomatic perspective, but after the tense exchange, she was wary of what might transpire during such a meeting. This way, if you please, she said, gesturing toward the doors. As the delegation followed her, Alara caught Veka's eye and received a subtle nod, a reminder to remain vigilant but diplomatic. The journey to Kalen's quarters was conducted in tense silence. Alara led the way, hyper-aware of the three Virel representatives following behind her. She could feel their eyes on her back, particularly Technician Soren's, whose interest in Zephyr's Edge had been all too obvious. As they approached Kalen's chambers, Ilara instructed the guards, "Remain at high alert. No one enters or leaves without my explicit permission." Then, turning to the envoys, she added, "I will be present for the entirety of your meeting with the prince." "Is such caution really necessary?" Chancellor Lavina asked, her tone suggesting offense. "The blood oath requires it," Ilara replied simply, and opened the door. Prince Kalen was standing by the window, as if he had been expecting them. His expression revealed nothing as the delegation entered, though Ilara thought she detected a momentary tension in his posture when he saw who had come. "Chancellor," he greeted neutrally. "Commander, technician, an interesting delegation Virel has sent." "Your Highness," Chancellor Lavina responded with a formal bow. "We are relieved to find you well, despite your circumstances. Captain Thorn has ensured my comfort and safety." Kalen said, his gaze briefly meeting Ilara's. "The blood oath is being honored with all due respect." Technician Soren stepped forward, his eyes fixed not on Kalen, but on the bandage covering his face. "Your wound, may I inquire about its severity?" The question seemed oddly focused, and Ilara's suspicion deepened. "A deep cut," Kalen replied, one hand rising instinctively to touch the bandage. "But the healers here are skilled. It will scar, but there will be no lasting damage." "Fascinating," Soren murmured almost to himself. "The blade that drew blood from a royal bloodline, and now binds its wielder. The energetic potential of such a connection is significant." Commander Jax cleared his throat loudly, shooting a warning glance at the technician. "We've come to negotiate your return, Your Highness. Generous terms have been offered to Arden." "Have they?" Kalen asked, his tone carefully neutral. "And what exactly has Virel offered for my safe return?" As Commander Jax began to outline the proposed concessions, Ilara watched the subtle interplay between the three envoys and Kalen. The prince's expression remained impassive, but his eyes were alert, constantly moving between the delegates, as if searching for something unsaid. When Jax finished his explanation, Kalen nodded thoughtfully. "Generous indeed. The Council of Arden would be foolish to refuse such terms." "And yet," Chancellor Lavina said, her gaze shifting to Ilara, "the captain believes that such concessions do not satisfy the requirements of her blood oath. She seems determined to maintain her guardianship of you, regardless of Virel's offers." Kalen's eyes found Ilara's something unreadable passing between them. "Captain Thorn takes her obligations seriously, as any honorable warrior should. The blood oath is not a political tool to be negotiated away." The Chancellor's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. "With respect, Your Highness, such adherence to antiquated traditions threatens the stability of both our city-states. Surely you see that your return to Virel is the most rational course of action." "Rational, perhaps," Kalen conceded. "But Caldara's history is built on more than mere rationality, Chancellor. The old ways persist for a reason." Technician Soren had been circling the room during this exchange, his attention seemingly on the furnishings and architecture. But Ilara noticed that he was gradually moving closer to where Zephyr's Edge hung at her hip. His interest in the blade was becoming increasingly obvious and concerning. "I believe this meeting has served its purpose," Ilara announced firmly. "The prince is well, as you can see. Further discussions regarding his status will continue tomorrow, after Arden's council has considered Virel's offer." Chancellor Lavina looked as though she wanted to object, but instead nodded curtly. "Very well. But remember, Captain, time is of the essence. Virel's patience has limits, as does its generosity." As Ilara escorted the envoys out, Technician Soren fell into step beside her. "Fascinating weapon you carry, Captain," he remarked casually. "I'd be most interested in examining it more closely. For historical documentation, you understand." "Zephyr's Edge is not available for examination," Ilara replied coolly, "especially not by those who view ancient traditions as mere energetic potential." Soren's smile was thin. "You misunderstand my interest, Captain. I revere the old ways. I simply see possibilities in them that others miss. Soren, Commander Jax called sharply from ahead. Now is not the time. With a final, lingering glance at Alara's blade, the technician moved forward to rejoin his companions. Alara watched them go, the unease in her gut growing stronger. There was definitely more to this delegation than a simple diplomatic mission to recover their prince. Once the envoys were safely escorted to their assigned quarters and placed under discreet surveillance, Alara returned to Kaelin's chambers. She found him standing exactly where she had left him, his expression troubled. "You were right to be wary," she said without preamble. "The technician Soren, he's far too interested in Zephyr's Edge and the Blood Oath." "Soren is dangerous," Kaelin confirmed grimly. "More so than he appears. He leads the faction I warned you about, those who seek to harness traditional power sources for technological applications." "The Blood Cabal?" Alara asked directly. Kaelin winced slightly at the term. "That name is considered somewhat dramatic, but yes, he and his followers believe that the spiritual energy of ancient traditions can be captured and utilized. The Blood Oath is of particular interest to them because it creates a tangible connection between individuals, a bond that transcends physical space." "And how does this relate to you?" Alara pressed. "Why would they send such a high-ranking delegation for your return, if, as you implied earlier, some in Virel might see your capture as an opportunity?" Kaelin hesitated, then sighed. "Because I've been opposing their experiments. My father the king is ill, and aging, increasingly influenced by Soren's promises of technological solutions to Virel's water shortages. As heir, I've advocated for more traditional approaches and cooperation with other city-states, rather than exploitation of ancient power sources." "So they want you back because if I remain here too long, they fear I might share what I know with Arden," Kaelin explained. "And because they want to study the Blood Oath connection between us. Soren wasn't just interested in your blade, Captain. He was assessing both of us, measuring the strength of the bond the Oath has created." Alara absorbed this information, her mind racing with implications. "And the generous offer to Arden." "A smokescreen," Kaelin said dismissively. "Once I'm back in Virel, any agreements would be renegotiated under pressure. Chancellor Lavina is firmly in Soren's camp. She would never honor such concessions in the long term." It was a troubling picture, and one that complicated Alara's already difficult position. She was sworn to protect Kaelin, but returning him to Virel might place him in grave danger. Yet keeping him in Arden indefinitely was politically untenable and would likely lead to military conflict. "What would you have me do?" she asked finally. "The Council will pressure me to accept Virel's offer. They see it as an unprecedented opportunity to secure resources without bloodshed." Kaelin's gaze was intense. "I need time, Captain. Time to formulate a plan that safeguards both me and Arden. If I return to Virel now under these circumstances, Soren will use me to advance his agenda, and that agenda ultimately threatens all city-states on Caldara, not just Arden." "How much time?" Alara asked, already calculating how she might delay the Council's decision. "A few days at most," Kaelin replied. "Enough to gather evidence of Soren's true intentions, and perhaps communicate with allies in Virel who oppose him." Alara considered this request carefully. Her oath obligated her to protect Kaelin, but her duty to Arden couldn't be ignored either. If what he said was true, however, protecting him might ultimately be protecting Arden as well. "I'll try," she promised. "But I'll need more than just your word to convince the Council. Do you have any tangible evidence of this technomancer plot?" Kaelin moved to the desk where he had been writing earlier. "I've been documenting what I know," he said, gathering the parchments. "It's incomplete, and much of it will sound like wild speculation without context, but it's a start." As he handed the documents to Alara, their hands briefly touched. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Not unpleasant, but startling in its intensity. From Kaelin's sudden intake of breath, he had felt it too. "The Blood Oath," he murmured. "It strengthens the connection between us." Alara pulled her hand away, unsettled by the sensation. All the more reason to be cautious around Soren. If he seeks to harness such connections, then we are both potential subjects for his experiments. Kalen finished grimly. Be careful, Captain, and trust no one completely, not even your own council. Technomancer influence has spread further than you might think. With that ominous warning, Alara took her leave, the parchment secured inside her formal armor. The path forward was clouded with uncertainty, but one thing was clear. The blood oath had embroiled her in a conspiracy that threatened far more than just her personal honor or duty. As she made her way through the Citadel corridors, Ilara couldn't shake the lingering sensation of that momentary connection with Kalen. The blood oath was more than just an ancient tradition. It was a tangible force, binding them together in ways she was only beginning to understand. And if Soren and his technomancers sought to exploit that force, both she and Kalen, and perhaps all of Arden, were in grave danger. The council chamber was already filled with heated debate when Alara arrived later that evening. The reports of Varel's generous offer had spread quickly, and opinions were sharply divided. Some councilors saw it as an unprecedented opportunity for Arden to gain significant advantages without bloodshed. Others were suspicious of Varel's uncharacteristic generosity and urged caution. Councillor Solon noticed Alara's entrance and gestured for her to approach the central speaking platform. The discussions quieted as she took her position, all eyes turning to her. Captain Thorne. Solon began formally. You met with the envoys from Varel and have seen their prince. The council would hear your assessment of the situation before we proceed further. Alara took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. She needed to be careful here to reveal enough to urge caution without exposing Kalen's more sensitive claims before she had evidence to support them. Honorable councilors, she began. The meeting with Varel's envoys raised several concerns. The delegation was unusual, led by Chancellor Lavina herself, accompanied by a military commander and a technician named Soren. Their offer, while generous on its surface, comes with troubling undercurrents. What sort of undercurrents? Councillor Drav asked sharply. The technician showed unusual interest in Zephyr's Edge and the blood oath, Alara explained. Not as traditions to be respected, but as sources of power to be studied and potentially exploited. There are indications that elements within Varel's leadership are pursuing technological applications that utilize the spiritual energy of our ancient traditions. Murmurs ran through the council at this claim. Some councilors looked skeptical, others concerned. Do you have evidence of this? Councillor Veka asked. I'm gathering it, Alara replied carefully. But consider this. Why would Varel offer such unprecedented concessions for the return of their prince? Why send their chancellor rather than standard diplomatic envoys? And why include a technician in a delegation that should be focused on political negotiations? Perhaps they simply value their prince highly, Councillor Jens suggested. He is their heir after all. Then, why did their forces abandon him so readily on the battlefield? Alara countered. No, there is more at work here than simple concern for Prince Kalen's well-being. Councillor Terra leaned forward, her expression troubled. Even if what you suggest is true, Captain, can we afford to refuse Varel's offer? Exclusive rights to the northern aquifer would solve our water shortages for years to come. At what cost? Alara asked. If these technomancers succeed in harnessing the power of our traditions for their war machines, any advantage we gain now could be rendered meaningless in the future. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Finally, Councillor Solon spoke. You believe accepting their offer would be dangerous. I believe we need time, Alara stated firmly. Time to investigate these concerns before making a decision that could have far-reaching consequences. The blood oath compels me to protect Prince Kalen, and I have reason to believe his safety would be compromised if he were returned to Varel under current circumstances. How much time are you requesting? Captain Solon asked. 3 days, Alara replied. Give me 3 days to gather concrete evidence of these technomancer activities. If I find nothing substantial, we can proceed with negotiations on Virel's terms." The council members exchanged glances, weighing the request. 3 days was not unreasonable for deliberations on such a significant offer, even without Ilara's concerns. "And how do you propose to respond to the envoys in the meantime?" Councillor Veka inquired. "Tell them that Arden's council is carefully considering their generous offer and consulting the ancient texts regarding the blood oath," Ilara suggested. "It's the truth, and it buys us the time we need without outright rejection of their proposal." After further discussion and debate, the council voted narrowly in favor of Ilara's request. She would have 3 days to investigate her suspicions and gather evidence. In the meantime, Councillor Veka would engage the envoys in preliminary discussions, neither accepting nor rejecting their offer outright. As the council session adjourned, Councillor Solon approached Ilara privately. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Captain," he warned. "If your suspicions prove unfounded, you risk both your position and Arden's relations with Virel." "And if they're correct," Ilara challenged. Solon's aged face was grave. "Then we may be facing a threat greater than mere water shortages or border disputes. Proceed carefully and trust few with your investigations. If these technomancers are as influential as you suggest, they may have sympathizers even within our walls." It was a sobering thought, and one that echoed Kalen's earlier warning. Ilara nodded her understanding and took her leave, her mind already turning to how best to use the limited time she had been granted. Her first step was to secure Kalen's written account of the technomancer activities in Virel. She returned to her quarters and carefully reviewed the parchments he had given her. As he had warned, much of it seemed speculative, without context references to experiments with tradition-bound energy, unusual devices being installed in Virel's war machines, and suspicions about Chancellor Lavina's rise to power after the previous chancellor died under mysterious circumstances. But scattered throughout were specific details that might be verifiable names of sympathizers within Virel, locations of suspected technomancer facilities, and descriptions of distinctive devices used in their experiments. If she could confirm even a few of these details independently, it would lend credibility to the rest of his claims. As she considered how to proceed, a knock came at her door. She quickly concealed the parchments before calling, "Enter." It was Lieutenant Maris, her expression troubled. "Captain, there's something you should know." One of the guards reported unusual activity near the envoy's quarters. The technician Soren was seen using some sort of scanning device along the corridors, particularly near power conduits and water distribution systems. "Was he confronted?" Ilara asked sharply. "No," Maris replied. The guard thought it prudent to observe and report, rather than potentially cause a diplomatic incident. The technician eventually returned to his quarters, but you're concerned about his actions," Ilara finished. Maris nodded. "It seemed more like reconnaissance than innocent curiosity. And there's something else. Rumors are spreading among the troops about your protection of the prince. Some see it as placing an enemy's welfare above Arden's interests." It was what Ilara had feared, the beginning of a potential rift within the Storm Guard itself. "What's your assessment of the situation, Lieutenant?" Maris hesitated, then spoke frankly. "I still believe the blood oath places an unnecessary burden on you and Arden, but I'm becoming increasingly concerned about the Virel delegation. Their behavior doesn't align with standard diplomatic protocols." "Then help me," Ilara said decisively. "The Council has granted me 3 days to investigate these envoys and gather evidence of potential threats. I need someone I can trust to assist me, someone with the Storm Guard's respect, who can keep the troops focused on their duties while I pursue this matter." Maris looked surprised at the request, then resolute. "What do you need from me, Captain?" "Discreet surveillance of the envoys, particularly Technician Soren," Ilara instructed. "Select only the most trustworthy guards for this task, and I need access to our intelligence archives, any reports concerning unusual technological developments in Virel over the past year." "Consider it done," Maris agreed. "And what of Prince Kalen?" "His security remains my personal responsibility," Ilara stated. But I'll need to leave the Citadel briefly tomorrow to pursue a lead. Can I trust you to oversee his protection in my absence?" It was a significant request, asking Maris to temporarily assume the duties of the Blood Oath, despite her reservations about it. But Alara needed someone she could rely on, and despite their differences of opinion, Maris had always proven loyal to both her captain and Arden. After a moment's consideration, Maris nodded. "I'll ensure his safety as if the oath bound me personally. You have my word." "Thank you," Alara said sincerely. "Report to me at dawn and we'll finalize the details." After Maris departed, Ilara returned to her review of Kalen's documents. One detail in particular had caught her attention, a reference to a failed experiment at an outpost in the Badlands, halfway between Arden and Varel. According to Kalen, the outpost had been abandoned after an attempt to harness the energy of a traditional blessing ritual had resulted in an unforeseen energetic discharge that killed several technicians. If such an incident had occurred, there might be physical evidence remaining at the site, evidence that could support Kalen's claims about the technomancer's activities. It would be risky to venture into the Badlands alone, but Alara couldn't spare a larger force without drawing attention to her investigation. Tomorrow, she would visit this outpost and see what answers it might hold. In the meantime, she needed to ensure that both Kalen and Zephyr's Edge remained secure. If Soren was indeed scanning the Citadel's systems, he might be planning something more direct than mere observation. Alara placed Kalen's documents in a secure hiding place within her quarters, then checked that Zephyr's Edge was properly secured at her side. The blade seemed to hum faintly against her hip, as if responding to her thoughts, or perhaps to the proximity of the technomancers who coveted its power. Whatever forces were at work, political, technological, or spiritual, Ilara was determined to navigate them with the same discipline and courage that had earned her command of the Storm Guard. The Blood Oath had bound her to Kalen, but her duty to Arden remained paramount. If these two obligations could be reconciled, she would find a way. And if not, well, that was a decision she hoped she wouldn't have to make. Dawn broke over Arden with the crimson storms in temporary retreat, leaving the sky a deep, unsettling purple. It was rare to see even this much of the actual sky on Caldera Prime, and some considered it an ill omen. Alara, however, saw it as an opportunity the clearer conditions would make her journey to the abandoned outpost easier and safer. After briefing Maris on the security arrangements for both Kalen and the envoys, Ilara prepared for her expedition. She opted for lighter armor than her ceremonial Stormguard outfit, something that would allow for greater mobility while still offering protection. Zephyr's Edge, as always, hung at her side. She also selected a small but powerful scope, water supplies, emergency medical provisions, and a compact energy weapon as backup to her blade. The Badlands were dangerous, even in the best of conditions, home to both natural hazards and occasional bandits who preyed on travelers between the city-states. Before departing, Ilara visited Kalen's quarters to inform him of her plans. The prince was already awake, seated by the window, watching the unusual purple sky. "You're leaving," he observed as soon as she entered, taking in her travel attire. "How did you know?" Ilara asked, surprised by his immediate assessment. Kalen gestured vaguely toward her, or perhaps toward the blade at her side. "I felt it. Tension in the connection between us. The Blood Oath seems to create awareness even when we're not in direct contact." It was an unsettling thought, but it aligned with Alara's own experiences, the strange sensations she had felt when they touched the way Zephyr's Edge seemed more responsive since the oath was invoked. "I'm going to investigate the abandoned outpost you mentioned in your documents," she explained. "The one where the experiment failed." Kalen's expression grew concerned. "That's dangerous territory, Captain. Not just because of the Badlands' natural hazards, but because the site itself might still be unstable. The energetic discharge that occurred there wasn't like conventional energy. It affected the very fabric of reality in that location." "All the more reason to see it for myself," Ilara replied. The Council has given me 3 days to gather evidence. If what you've claimed about the technomancers is true, that outpost might provide the proof I need. And if I've exaggerated, Kalen asked, his blue eyes, studying her intently. If this is all an elaborate ploy to delay my return to Varel, Alara met his gaze steadily. Then I'll have wasted a day, and the Council will likely accept Varel's offer. Your fate will be out of my hands. Yet you believe me, he observed. It wasn't a question. I believe something is wrong about this situation, Alara clarified. And my instincts as a warrior tell me that Technician Soren and his companions pose a threat beyond normal diplomatic maneuvering. Whether that threat aligns exactly with your claims remains to be seen. Kalen nodded, accepting her assessment. Be careful, Captain. The outpost is in a narrow canyon, easily defensible but also easily trapped. And if you find evidence of technomancer activity, do not touch any devices you don't recognize. Some of their experiments have created objects that react unpredictably to human contact. I'll exercise all due caution, Alara assured him. Lieutenant Maris will oversee your security in my absence. She's a skilled warrior and completely loyal to Arden. But not completely loyal to you, Kalen surmised. Alara paused, considering her response. Maris is a pragmatist. She values results over traditions, survival over ceremony. She questions the blood oath, but she respects the chain of command. You'll be safe under her watch. I don't doubt her competence, Kalen said. But the blood oath creates a specific bond between us. If trouble arises, that bond may be significant. He hesitated, then added, There may be a way to strengthen our connection before you depart. A sort of fail-safe, should either of us face danger. Alara narrowed her eyes, instantly suspicious. What kind of strengthening? Nothing sinister, Kalen assured her quickly. Simply an acknowledgement of the oath, a conscious reinforcement of its power. The old texts speak of oath-takers sharing blood willingly to deepen their bond. You're suggesting we deliberately mix our blood? Alara asked incredulously. After all the concerns about technomancers exploiting such connections. Not mix our blood, Kalen clarified. Rather a symbolic reinforcement. In the original blood oath traditions, the protector would place a drop of their blood on the blade that had tasted their ward's blood, completing the circuit, so to speak. Alara's hand went instinctively to Zephyr's edge. You want me to put my blood on my own ancestral blade? Only if you feel it necessary, Kalen said. It would create a stronger awareness between us, potentially allowing you to sense if I'm in danger, or me to sense the same about you. But it's your decision, Captain. I merely offer the knowledge as a potential safeguard. Alara considered the suggestion carefully. On one hand, deliberately strengthening the oath seemed reckless when unknown forces might seek to exploit it. On the other, if she was venturing into potentially dangerous territory, such a connection could provide an additional layer of security for both of them. If I were to do this, she said slowly, what exactly would be involved? A small cut, Kalen explained. Just enough to produce a single drop of blood. Place it on the exact spot where my blood touched your blade. The texts say the runes will glow more brightly if the oath is strengthened successfully. It sounded simple enough, but Alara remained cautious. And the effects beyond increased awareness. The texts aren't specific, Kalen admitted. Each blood oath is unique, influenced by the individuals involved and the circumstances of its creation. But generally, it creates a stronger spiritual connection without altering the fundamental nature of the oath itself. You remain the protector, I the protected. Alara weighed the decision carefully. Her rational mind urged caution, but something deeper, perhaps the same instinct that had guided her through countless battles, pushed her toward acceptance. If the technomancers were as dangerous as Kalen claimed, any additional protection might prove vital. Very well, she decided finally. I'll complete the bond before I leave. Kalen nodded, a hint of relief in his expression. You'll need something to make a small cut. Alara produced a slim dagger from her boot, a standard backup weapon for Stormguard officers. This will suffice. Drawing Zephyr's edge, she laid the ancestral blade across her palms. The runes etched into its surface glowed faintly, as they had since the blood oath was invoked. Alara studied the edge carefully, until she identified a slightly brighter section, the exact spot where Kalen's blood had touched the metal during their duel. With methodical precision, she used the dagger to make a tiny cut on her thumb, just deep enough to produce a single drop of blood. As the crimson bead formed on her skin, she felt a strange anticipation, as if Zephyr's edge itself was waiting for what would come next. Carefully, she pressed her bloodied thumb to the spot on the blade. The effect was immediate and startling. The runes flared with brilliant light, momentarily illuminating the entire room. Alara felt a surge of energy flow through her, not painful, but intensely powerful, like the rush before a lightning strike. Across from her, Kalen gasped, one hand going to the bandaged wound on his face. "I feel it," he whispered. "The connection. It's stronger now." Alara felt it too, a heightened awareness of Kalen's presence, as if a part of her consciousness was now permanently attuned to him. She could sense his emotions, his vital energy, in a way that transcended normal perception. "This is more intense than I expected," she admitted, sheathing Zephyr's edge, as the glow of the runes gradually diminished to a slightly brighter version of their previous state. "But it worked," Kalen said, his voice filled with wonder. "The blood oath is complete now. If either of us faces danger, the other will know." Alara nodded, still adjusting to the new sensations. It would take time to fully understand what this strengthened bond meant, but she couldn't deny its potential utility, especially given the uncertainties that lay ahead. "I should depart," she said, gathering her resolve. "The journey to the outpost will take several hours, and I want to return before nightfall if possible." "Be vigilant, Captain," Kalen urged. "And remember, the bond works both ways now. If you find yourself in peril, I may be able to help even from within these walls." Alara wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that, but she nodded acknowledgement before taking her leave. As she exited the citadel and made her way to the stables where her mount waited, she was acutely aware of Zephyr's edge at her side, its weight both familiar and somehow new, a physical manifestation of the bond she now shared with the prince of her enemy city-state. Whatever came of this day's investigation, one thing was certain: the blood oath had irrevocably changed her. Whether that change would ultimately serve or hinder her duty to Arden remained to be seen. The journey across the Badlands was arduous, but uneventful. Alara's mount, a sturdy, desert-adapted quadruped bred specifically for Caldara's harsh conditions, maintained a steady pace across the red sand and rocky terrain. The unusual purple sky gradually gave way to the more familiar crimson as the perpetual storms began to reassert themselves in the distance. Using Kalen's directions, Alara navigated toward a narrow canyon system about halfway between Arden and Varel territories. The location was strategic, close enough to both city-states for access, but remote enough to conduct experiments away from prying eyes. As she approached the canyon entrance, Alara felt a strange, tingling sensation through her bond with Zephyr's edge. It was subtle but distinct, like the feeling before a storm when the air becomes charged with electricity. Something about this place was affecting the blade and, by extension, the blood oath. Dismounting and securing her steed at the canyon entrance, Alara proceeded on foot, all senses alert for danger. The canyon walls rose steeply on either side, creating a natural corridor that twisted and turned as it penetrated deeper into the Badlands. The red stone was streaked with darker veins of some unknown mineral, giving the entire passage an organic, almost vein-like appearance. After about a kilometer of careful progress, the canyon widened into a small basin. There, nestled against the far wall, stood the abandoned outpost. It was a modest structure, built of local stone, reinforced with metal supports, standard frontier architecture for Caldera Prime. What wasn't standard, however, was the strange rippling distortion in the air around it, like heat waves, but more pronounced and somehow wrong in a way Alara couldn't quite define. She approached cautiously, Zephyr's edge drawn and ready. The tingling sensation intensified as she neared the building, and the runes on her blade glowed more brightly in response. Whatever had happened here had left its mark not just on the physical structure, but on the very fabric of reality in this location. The main entrance to the outpost was partially collapsed, forcing Alara to clear away debris before she could enter. Inside, the evidence of catastrophe was immediately apparent. Furniture was overturned, equipment shattered, and, most disturbing of all, dark stains marked the floor and walls, the remains of those who had died here. But it was what stood in the center of the main room that truly captured Alara's attention. A circular platform, perhaps 3 meters in diameter, surrounded by a ring of unusual devices. Each device consisted of a metal base, supporting a crystal-like structure oriented toward the center of the circle. The crystals themselves were unlike anything Alara had seen before. Not quite solid, not quite liquid, they seemed to shift and flow, even as they maintained their overall shape. And within each crystal, embedded like insects in amber, were small objects that Alara recognized with growing horror: traditional talismans, ceremonial weapons, religious symbols from various Kaldaran cultural practices. The technomancers had literally been capturing physical representations of traditions and somehow extracting their spiritual essence. Carefully avoiding direct contact with any of the devices, Alara examined the rest of the outpost. In what appeared to be a research area, she found notes and diagrams that confirmed her worst suspicions. The technomancers weren't just studying traditional practices, they were systematically harvesting their power to fuel advanced weapons and devices. One diagram in particular caught her eye, a schematic labeled Blood Bond Amplifier. The accompanying notes described experiments to create devices that could harness the spiritual connection between blood-bonded individuals to power something called a reality distortion field. The potential applications were listed clinically: forced compliance, remote manipulation, energy extraction leading to subject deterioration. With growing dread, Alara realized that this was likely what Soren intended for her and Kalen to use their blood oath bond as a power source for his experiments, regardless of the harm it might cause them. As she gathered the most incriminating documents to take back to Arden, a sudden surge of alarm flooded through her. Not her own fear, but something transmitted through the blood oath. Kalen was in danger. The sensation was so intense that Alara staggered, one hand going to Zephyr's edge. The blade was vibrating slightly, its runes pulsing with urgent light. Something was happening at the Citadel, something that threatened her oath-bound ward. Quickly securing the documents inside her armor, Alara hurried out of the outpost. She needed to return to Arden immediately, but the journey would take hours, potentially too long, if Kalen's situation was dire. As she mounted her steed and urged it to its fastest sustainable pace, Alara tried to focus on the bond to glean more information about what might be happening. The sensations were chaotic: fear, anger, determination, pain, but without clear images or understanding. The strengthened blood oath allowed her to sense Kalen's peril, but not its specific nature. Whatever threatened him, Alara could only hope that Maris and the Stormguard would protect him until she returned. And if they couldn't? Alara pushed such thoughts aside, focusing instead on navigating the treacherous Badlands at dangerous speed. The crimson storms were intensifying again, making visibility poor and the journey even more hazardous. But she pressed on, driven by the pulsing urgency of Zephyr's Edge and the knowledge that her duty both to the Blood Oath and to Arden itself demanded her swift return. The attack came without warning. One moment Prince Kalen was confined to his quarters under Lieutenant Maris's vigilant guard. The next, alarms blared throughout the Citadel as explosions rocked the outer defenses. Virel forces approaching from the south, a guard shouted, bursting into the corridor. They've breached the outer wall with some kind of new weapon. Maris immediately took command, ordering additional guards to secure Kalen's quarters while she assessed the situation. Stay here, she instructed the prince firmly. Whatever happens, do not leave this room without direct orders from me or Captain Thorne." Kalen nodded, his expression grim. As Maris departed, he moved to the window, trying to catch a glimpse of the attack. Through the crimson-tinted glass, he could see smoke rising from Arden's southern quarter. The sound of energy weapons and traditional arms mingled with shouts and screams. This was no normal raid, it was a full-scale assault, timed precisely to coincide with Alara's absence. That couldn't be coincidence. Somehow the envoys must have discovered her departure and seized the opportunity. Kalen felt a surge of concern through the blood oath bond. Alara had sensed something was wrong. The strengthened connection was working, but she was hours away across the Badlands. Whatever was happening here would be resolved one way or another before she could return. He paced the room, frustration building. As Varel's prince and military commander, being confined during battle was maddening. But Maris was right to secure him. He was both a valuable captive and potentially the primary target of this attack. His suspicions were confirmed minutes later when the door to his quarters burst open. Technician Soren strode in, flanked by 2 soldiers in Varel uniforms. The guards who had been posted outside lay motionless on the floor, whether dead or merely unconscious. Kalen couldn't tell. "Your Highness," Soren greeted him with a mocking bow. "It's time to return you to Varel." "This is your doing, Soren," Kalen demanded, though he already knew the answer. "Attacking a city-state during diplomatic negotiations. Even for you, this is extreme." "Necessity, my prince," Soren replied smoothly. "Captain Thorne's departure provided an opportunity we couldn't ignore, and we've confirmed she's investigating one of our research outposts. The situation has become untenable." "The Council will never forgive this breach," Kalen warned. "You've ensured Varel and Arden will be at war for generations." Soren smiled, the expression cold and calculating. "The Council's opinions will soon be irrelevant. Once we've recovered you, and more importantly Captain Thorne and her blade, the final phase of our work can begin. The power we'll harness from your blood oath will transform warfare on Caldara forever." "You're insane," Kalen said flatly. "The blood oath isn't some battery you can tap for your machines. It's a spiritual bond, unpredictable and deeply personal. All energy sources seem mysterious until properly understood and harnessed," Soren countered. "Your connection with Captain Thorne is merely a particularly potent example. Royal blood bound to an ancestral blade through a tradition-sanctified ritual. Ideal conditions." He gestured to his soldiers. "Secure him. We depart immediately." As the soldiers moved forward, Kalen tensed, preparing to resist. He might be outnumbered, but he wouldn't be taken without a fight. Just as the first soldier reached for him, however, the door burst open again. Lieutenant Maris stood in the doorway, her blade drawn and stained with fresh blood. "Step away from the prince," she commanded, her voice deadly calm. Soren turned, annoyed at the interruption. "Lieutenant, this doesn't concern you. Prince Kalen is returning to his people." "By force during an unprovoked attack on Arden," Maris replied coldly. "I think not." "The attack is a regrettable necessity," Soren said. "One that could end immediately if you simply allow us to leave with the prince." Maris's eyes narrowed. "Captain Thorne placed him under my protection in her absence. I take that responsibility seriously." "You don't even believe in the blood oath," Soren observed, studying her. "Why risk your life for a tradition you consider outdated?" "I believe in duty," Maris replied simply. "And mine is clear." Without further warning, she attacked. Her blade flashed as she engaged both soldiers simultaneously, her combat style efficient and lethal. One soldier fell immediately, a precision strike to the throat ending his life, before he could react. The second lasted longer, parrying several blows before Maris fainted, and then drove her blade into his chest. Soren backed away, reaching for a device at his belt. Impressive, Lieutenant, but ultimately futile. Before he could activate whatever weapon he carried, Kalen lunged forward, tackling the technician to the ground. They struggled briefly before Kalen managed to wrench the device from Soren's grasp and fling it across the room. "Enough!" Kalen snarled, pinning the technician down. Your attack has failed. Order your forces to withdraw before more lives are lost needlessly. Soren laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You think this was our only plan? Even now, Commander Jax leads forces to intercept Captain Thorn in the Badlands. She will be captured, her blade taken, and the two of you will provide the power source we've sought for so long. Alarm surged through Kalen at this revelation. Alara was walking into a trap alone and unaware. He needed to warn her somehow to help her, as she had helped him. Focusing on the blood oath bond, Kalen concentrated all his will on sending a warning through the connection they shared. He had no idea if such communication was possible, but he had to try. Mentally, he projected images of Soren, of the attack, of Commander Jax's ambush, anything that might alert Alara to the danger. Whether his effort had any effect he couldn't tell, but the momentary distraction was enough for Soren to break free of his grip and scramble toward a secondary device hidden in his boot. Before either Kalen or Maris could stop him, he activated it. A high-pitched whine filled the room, and the air seemed to ripple and distort. Maris staggered, dropping her blade and clutching her head in pain. Kalen felt it too, a strange pressure building behind his eyes, disorienting and nauseating. Tradition disruptor, Soren explained, climbing to his feet. Specifically calibrated to interfere with the spiritual energies that underpin your blood oath. Painful for you, and when Captain Thorn comes within range, utterly debilitating for her. Through the growing pain, Kalen lunged for the device, but Soren easily sidestepped him. The technician's immunity to the effect confirmed what Kalen had long suspected. Soren had somehow modified himself to be unaffected by traditional energies, allowing him to manipulate them without consequence. The attack on Arden is a diversion. Soren continued, seemingly enjoying the opportunity to explain his plan now that he had the upper hand. Its real purpose is to draw Captain Thorn back in haste, leading her directly into our ambush. Once we have both of you, we'll withdraw. Arden will be damaged but intact, a reasonable price for the power we'll gain. You underestimate the Storm Guard, Maris growled through gritted teeth, fighting against the device's effects. And you underestimate Captain Thorn. Perhaps, Soren acknowledged. But we've planned for contingencies. One way or another, the blood oath will be ours to harness. As he spoke, the building shook with another explosion, this one closer to the Citadel Center. Soren smiled. That would be Chancellor Lavina's team securing our exit route. Time to depart, Your Highness. But before he could move toward Kalen, the window behind them shattered. A figure swung through the opening, landing in a combat-ready crouch. It was Alara, her armor covered in dust, and grime from her journey, Zephyr's Edge gleaming in her hand. Captain, Maris exclaimed, surprise and relief evident in her voice despite her obvious pain. Impossible, Soren whispered, staring at Alara in disbelief. You were in the Badlands. Our forces were waiting. I took a different route. Alara replied, her gaze taking in the situation. Quickly, Kalen and Maris suffering from some unknown effect, Soren holding a strange device, the dead Varel soldiers on the floor. The blood oath called me back, she continued, advancing on Soren. It seems our strengthened bond has unexpected benefits. Understanding dawned on Kalen. His mental warning had worked, or at least the intensity of his distress had been enough to divert Alara from the ambush laid for her. The blood oath was indeed more powerful than either of them had realized. Soren recovered from his shock and adjusted a control on his device. No matter. The disruptor affects you too, Captain, even more strongly as the primary oath holder. Alara faltered momentarily as the device's effect washed over her. Pain etched her features, and Zephyr's Edge trembled in her grip. But rather than collapse, as Soren clearly expected, she straightened, her jaw set with determination. You're right, she acknowledged, taking another step forward. It hurts, but pain is an old companion to the Storm Guard. Another step. We're trained to transform pain into strength. Another. To use it, rather than succumb to it. Soren backed away, genuine fear now visible in his eyes. He increased the device's power, causing both Kaelin and Maris to cry out as the pain intensified. But Alara continued her advance each step, seemingly drawing power from Zephyr's Edge, whose runes now blazed with brilliant light. "Impossible!" Soren repeated, his composure cracking. "The disruption field should incapacitate you completely." "Should," Alara agreed now, only an arm's length from him. "But the blood oath isn't just about pain or obligation, technician. It's about protection." Her gaze flicked briefly to Kaelin. On both sides. With a sudden lunge, she knocked the device from Soren's hand and pinned him against the wall, Zephyr's Edge at his throat. The moment the disruption field deactivated, Kaelin and Maris both sighed in relief, the pain immediately subsiding. "It's over, Soren," Alara stated flatly. "Your attack has failed. Your ambush in the Badlands has lost its target. And now you'll face Arden's justice for this unprovoked assault." "Captain," Maris said urgently, retrieving her blade and moving to Alara's side. "The Citadel is still under attack. Chancellor Lavina and Commander Jax are coordinating Varel forces throughout the city." "Then we need to end this quickly," Alara replied, her gaze never leaving Soren. "Lieutenant, escort Prince Kaelin to the council chamber. It should be secure. Then gather whatever Stormguard you can find and focus on defending the Citadel's central areas." "And him?" Maris asked, nodding toward Soren. "He comes with me," Alara decided. "I want the council to hear his confession about the Technomancer's true agenda, and then we'll use him to negotiate a ceasefire." Maris nodded and moved to Kaelin's side. "This way, Your Highness. Stay close." As they prepared to leave, Kaelin caught Alara's eye. "You felt it," he said, not a question, but a confirmation. "Through the bond." Alara nodded. "I was halfway back from the outpost when I received impressions, warnings. I changed course, avoided the main routes. It saved my life." "The strengthened oath," Kaelin said wonderingly. "It worked both ways, just as the text suggested it might." "Save the discussion for later," Maris urged, though her tone had lost some of its earlier skepticism regarding the blood oath. "We need to move now." As they separated, Maris and Kaelin heading for the council chamber, Alara forcing Soren ahead of her toward the Citadel's command center. The sounds of battle continued to echo through Arden. But there was a new determination in Alara's step, a certainty that had been missing before. The blood oath had been tested and had proven its worth. Not as a source of power for technomantic experiments, but as a genuine bond between two individuals, a bond that transcended traditional enmity and had potentially saved both their lives. Now they needed to use that bond to save their city-states from a war that threatened to destroy everything. The battle for Arden raged through the Citadel and the surrounding city districts. Varel's forces, though smaller than a traditional invasion force, were equipped with advanced weapons that gave them a significant advantage. Energy weapons that could penetrate Arden's defenses with ease, personal shields that repelled conventional attacks, and most disturbing of all devices, similar to Soren's disruptor, that caused disorientation and pain in those with strong traditional ties. Alara forced Soren through the corridors at Blade Point, navigating toward the command center, where she hoped to find Counselor Drav, coordinating the defense. They encountered pockets of fighting along the way, Stormguard soldiers engaged with Varel troops, civilians fleeing to shelter the occasional technomancer, directing the assault with their strange devices. "Your forces are well equipped," Alara observed grimly, pressing Zephyr's Edge closer to Soren's neck as they paused behind cover to let a skirmish ahead resolve. "I assume these are the fruits of your experiments with traditional energy." "Merely prototypes." Soren replied, his initial fear now replaced with a cold calculation. "The full potential of tradition-based technology remains largely untapped. With the power of a royal blood oath, however." "That will never happen," Alara cut him off. "Even if you somehow succeeded in capturing both Prince Kaelin and myself, the blood oath isn't something you can simply extract and harness like water from a well." "You underestimate our understanding of spiritual energetics," Soren said, with disturbing confidence. "The outpost you visited was merely one of many. Our research has progressed significantly since that unfortunate incident." Before Alara could respond, a voice called out from an intersecting corridor. "Captain Thorne, this way!" It was Counselor Drav, accompanied by a squad of Arden's elite guards. His battle-scarred face was grim as he took in the situation. "I see you've captured one of the architects of this treachery," he observed, eyeing Soren with undisguised contempt. "The technician who served as envoy," Alara confirmed. "His people are after Zephyr's Edge and the blood oath it maintains. This attack is merely a means to that end." Drav nodded, unsurprised. "We suspected something was amiss when Chancellor Lavina disappeared from her quarters shortly before the attack began. She's been spotted directing forces near the Southern Water Processing Facility. They'll target our critical infrastructure," Alara surmised. "Not to destroy it, but to force concessions." "Or simply as a diversion," Soren interjected, earning himself a harsh jab from Zephyr's Edge. "I merely point out that, if our goal were truly conquest, we would have brought a larger force." "He's right," Drav acknowledged reluctantly. "This isn't a traditional invasion. It's targeted, precise mission with specific objectives." "Which means we can end it by denying those objectives," Alara concluded. "Counselor, what's the status of the Citadel's defenses?" "Holding, but strained," Drav reported. "The southern and eastern quadrants have been breached. The council chamber remains secure, as does the central tower. Counselor Solon has activated the emergency protocols. All civilians are being evacuated to the underground shelters." "And Lieutenant Maris Prince Kalen?" "Last report placed them en route to the council chamber," Drav answered. "No confirmation of arrival yet." This concerned Alara. The Blood Oath bond wasn't transmitting any acute distress from Kalen, but that didn't guarantee his safety. With the Technomancer's disruption technology, the bond itself could be compromised. "We need to re-establish control," she decided. "Counselor, can you get me access to the Citadel's communication system? If we can broadcast Soren's capture and threaten him with immediate execution, it might force Chancellor Lavina to negotiate." Drav considered this, then nodded. "The broadcast center is this way, but be prepared for resistance. It's a strategic location they'll want to control." As they moved through the Citadel, Alara kept Soren firmly in her grasp, Zephyr's Edge, never wavering from his throat. The technician remained surprisingly calm, almost as if he expected the situation to turn in his favor at any moment. His confidence was unsettling. They encountered several more skirmishes, each one confirming that Varel's forces, while not overwhelming in number, possessed technological advantages that made them formidable opponents. Energy weapons that could penetrate traditional armor, portable shields that defied conventional attacks, and most concerning devices that seemed to target individuals with traditional spiritual connections, like the Storm Guard, with their ancestral oaths and rituals. "Your weapons specifically target tradition bearers," Alara observed as they passed a group of Storm Guard soldiers, suffering from effects similar to what Soren's device had caused earlier. "You've weaponized the very traditions you claim to study." "Not weaponized," Soren corrected pedantically. "Repurposed. Traditional energies are inherently neutral. It's their application that determines their function. We've simply found more efficient uses for them than ceremonial displays and outdated oaths." "Those outdated oaths are what give meaning to our actions," Alara replied sharply. "They connect us to our past and guide our future. They remind us that we're more than just survivors scrambling for resources. We're heirs to a legacy worth preserving." "Noble sentiments," Soren acknowledged with a hint of condescension. "But sentiments don't secure water supplies or defend against rival city-states. Technology does. And tradition-based technology offers possibilities beyond anything conventional science can achieve." Their philosophical disagreement was interrupted as they reached the broadcast center. Signs of fighting were evident: scorch marks on the walls, overturned furniture, a body in Arden uniform lying just outside the entrance. But the facility itself appeared intact and unoccupied. "Secure the perimeter," Drav ordered his guards. "Captain Thorne and I will handle the broadcast." As the guards took up defensive positions, Ilara forced Soren into the broadcast center. The technology here was a blend of old and new traditional communication systems, augmented with more advanced equipment. Drav moved to the main console and began activating the Citadel-wide communication network. "Ready in 30 seconds, he reported. "What's your plan, Captain?" "Simple," Ilara replied, positioning Soren directly in front of the broadcast sensor. "I'll announce his capture and demand Chancellor Lavina's immediate surrender. If she refuses, I'll execute him on the spot." "You won't," Soren said with disturbing confidence. "The Stormguard Code forbids the execution of prisoners, except after formal trial. Your adherence to tradition binds you as surely as the blood oath." "These are exceptional circumstances," Ilara countered, though the technician's assessment of Stormguard principles was uncomfortably accurate. "And you're not just any prisoner. You're the architect of an unprovoked attack on Arden." Before Soren could respond, the broadcast system activated. Drav nodded to Ilara, indicating that she was now being transmitted throughout the Citadel and city. "Attention all forces," Ilara began, her voice clear and commanding. "This is Captain Ilara Thorn of the Arden Stormguard. I have captured Technician Soren, architect of this attack, and leader of Varel's Technomancer faction. To Chancellor Lavina and all Varel forces, cease hostilities immediately, and withdraw from Arden territory, or Soren will be executed without trial." She paused, allowing the message to sink in. "You have 10 minutes to comply. Proof of withdrawal must include the Chancellor's personal surrender at the Citadel's main entrance. Any continued aggression will be met with Soren's immediate execution, followed by the full might of Arden's military response." As Drav ended the broadcast, Soren laughed softly. "Impressive performance, Captain, but ultimately futile." "We'll see," Ilara replied, though his confidence continued to unnerve her. "Counselor, can you verify if Lieutenant Maris and Prince Kalen reached the council chamber safely?" Drav moved to another console and accessed the internal security network. After a moment, he frowned. No confirmation. The last security checkpoint they passed was in the East Wing, heading toward the council chamber. But that was over 20 minutes ago. Concern flared within Ilara. The journey to the council chamber shouldn't have taken so long, even accounting for the chaos of battle. And now that she focused on it, the blood oath bond felt muted, as if something was interfering with the connection. "Something's wrong," she said, her grip on Soren tightening instinctively. "Counselor, can you handle the prisoner I need to find Prince Kalen?" "You suspect a trap?" Drav asked, already moving to take Ilara's position guarding Soren. "I don't know," Ilara admitted. "But the blood oath compels me to ensure his safety, and something doesn't feel right." Drav nodded, taking hold of Soren as Ilara transferred the prisoner to his custody. "Go. We'll maintain the ultimatum and await the Chancellor's response." As Ilara turned to leave, Soren called after her. "Captain, before you rush off, you might want to consider why Chancellor Lavina would risk this attack in the first place. What does she gain if I'm captured or killed? Ask yourself, am I truly the leader of this operation, or merely a convenient face?" The question gave Ilara pause. Soren's confidence suddenly made more sense. He wasn't the true architect of this assault, but a subordinate, perhaps even a deliberate distraction. If so, who was really directing Varel's forces, and what was their actual objective? "Watch him closely," she instructed Drav. "He's more dangerous than he appears." With that warning, Ilara left the broadcast center, following the path Maris and Kalen should have taken toward the council chamber. The blood oath bond remained frustratingly dim, providing only the vaguest sense that Kalen still lived, but offering no guidance to his location or condition. As she navigated the corridors, stepping over debris, and occasionally encountering small groups of defenders, or wounded being tended to, Ilara tried to think like Chancellor Lavina. If Soren was a distraction, what was the true purpose of this attack? What would justify the diplomatic catastrophe of assaulting Arden during official negotiations? The answer came to her just as she reached the junction where Maris and Kalen should have turned toward the council chamber. Instead of continuing straight, she noticed signs of a struggle, scorch marks on the walls, blood on the floor, a discarded storm guard shoulder plate that she recognized as part of Maris's armor. They had been ambushed here, forced to take a different route. But where? Alara closed her eyes, focusing entirely on the blood oath bond. The connection was weak, but it existed. Slowly, she turned in place, testing the strength of the bond in different directions. When she faced the corridor leading toward the Citadel's lower levels, she felt the faintest strengthening of the connection. Down. They had gone down toward the foundations of the Citadel. But why? What was in the lower levels that would interest Chancellor Lavina? Then Alara remembered the water heart, the central nexus where all of Arden's water distribution systems connected the most critical and heavily protected infrastructure in the entire city-state. Control the water heart, and you controlled Arden's very lifeblood. But the water heart was supposed to be impenetrable, secured behind multiple layers of defenses, and accessible only to the highest-ranking council members and engineers. How would Varel's forces even know of its existence, let alone how to access it? Unless they had inside help. The thought was troubling, suggesting a level of infiltration that went beyond mere intelligence gathering. If Varel had agents within Arden's leadership, the entire city-state might be compromised at levels Alara hadn't considered. With renewed urgency, she headed toward the access points for the lower levels. The sounds of battle grew more distant as she descended, replaced by an eerie quiet that was somehow more unsettling than open conflict. The lower levels were utilitarian, lacking the architectural flourishes of the upper citadel. All functional stonework, reinforced metal, and efficient design. As she approached the first security checkpoint that should guard the path to the water heart, Alara found it abandoned. No guards, no signs of struggle, simply deserted, as if the post had been vacated before the attack even began. This confirmed her suspicion of inside help. Moving more cautiously now, she continued deeper into the Citadel's foundations. The blood oath bond grew slightly stronger. With each level she descended, confirming she was on the right track. But it remained muted, suggesting some form of disruption technology was in use. Finally, she reached the antechamber to the water heart itself, and found evidence of recent violence. 2 Arden guards lay dead, their wounds caused by energy weapons. The massive security door beyond them stood open, its complex locking mechanism apparently disengaged from within. Alara approached cautiously, Zephyr's edge drawn and ready. From inside she could hear voices, one she recognized as Chancellor Lavina's, another that might be Commander Jack's, and a third that sent a chill through her. It was Councillor Veka, Arden's chief diplomat. Processing ahead of schedule, Veka was saying. Once the final connections are established, the entire water distribution system will be under our control. Excellent, Lavina replied. And the disruption field? Active and stable, came Jax's voice. The prince and the lieutenant are contained, and the field will prevent Captain Thorne from sensing their location through the blood oath bond. Not entirely prevented, it seems, Alara said loudly, stepping into the doorway. Your technology has limitations, Chancellor. All eyes turned to her Chancellor Lavina, Commander, Jack's Counselor Veka, and several technicians working at the water heart's control systems. In a containment field near the center of the chamber, Alara could see Kalen and Maris both conscious, but unable to move or speak due to the energy barrier surrounding them. Captain Thorne, Lavina greeted her with cold composure. How inconvenient. I had hoped Soren would keep you occupied longer. He sends his regrets, Alara replied, stepping fully into the chamber, but remaining alert for traps or ambushes. He's currently explaining to Councillor Drav exactly how your Technomancer faction has been manipulating Varel's leadership and military for your own ends. Is he? Lavina seemed amused, rather than concerned. Soren has always been talkative. It's why we selected him as the public face of our work. He's convincing, detailed, and ultimately expendable. Alara's gaze shifted to Veka. And you, Counselor? What convinced you to betray Arden and everything you've sworn to protect? Veka's expression was one of condescension rather than guilt. I haven't betrayed Arden, Captain. I've secured its future. This alliance with the Technomancer faction will guarantee our water security for generations to come. At what cost? Alara demanded. Surrendering our autonomy, abandoning our traditions, becoming dependent on technology that corrupts the very spiritual foundations of our society. Progress requires sacrifice, Veka replied simply. The old ways served their purpose in their time, but Caldara grows harsher with each passing year. Traditional approaches to water conservation and military defense are no longer sufficient. The Technomancers offer solutions that work. Alara took another step into the chamber, noting the positions of everyone present and calculating her options. 4 technicians at the control systems, Commander Jax by the containment field, Chancellor Lavina, and Counselor Veka, near what appeared to be the main water distribution nexus. All were armed, and Jax wore what looked like an advanced version of the personal shields she had observed earlier. And what happens when these solutions require more and more spiritual energy to function? Alara challenged buying time as she assessed the situation. When the Technomancers start harvesting not just artifacts and symbols, but the very traditions that bind our communities together, when they turn to blood oaths, binding ceremonies, birth rituals, the foundations of our cultural identity, as mere fuel for their machines. An inevitable transition, Lavina admitted with surprising candor, but one that will secure the survival of our people on this harsh world. Sentiment and tradition are luxuries, Captain. Water and security are necessities. As they spoke, Alara noticed Kalen, watching her intently from within the containment field. He was trying to communicate something, his eyes repeatedly darting toward a device positioned near the field generator, likely the disruption technology that was muting their blood oath bond. And my capture? Alara asked, continuing to engage Lavina, while subtly shifting position to get a better angle on the device Kalen had indicated. Was that part of the plan all along? The blood oath was just a convenient means to study the connection between Zephyr's Edge and Prince Kalen. Initially, yes, Lavina confirmed. Though we didn't anticipate you would actually invoke the blood oath. That was fortuitous. A royal bloodline connected to an ancestral blade through a tradition-bound oath. The energy potential is enormous. And now, Alara pressed almost in position. Now, we'll take what we came for, Lavina stated coldly. Zephyr's Edge, Prince Kalen and you, Captain. The 3 components necessary for our most ambitious project, yet a city-wide disruption field that will render traditional bonds inert throughout Arden, allowing us to assume control with minimal resistance. You assume I'll surrender, Alara observed, her hand tightening on Zephyr's Edge. I assume you'll make the rational choice when faced with overwhelming odds, Lavina replied. Commander Jax alone could defeat you in combat, and that's before considering the rest of us. Furthermore, she gestured to the containment field. Any aggressive action on your part will result in the immediate execution of both Prince Kalen and your lieutenant. It was a dire situation with seemingly no favorable outcome. But Alara had noticed something else during their conversation. The technicians working at the control systems were repeatedly adjusting settings, suggesting the integration of their technology with Arden's water heart was not proceeding as smoothly as they had claimed. Perhaps, Alara acknowledged. But the blood oath compels me to protect Prince Kalen at all costs. Surrendering him to you, knowing your intentions, would violate that oath, something I cannot do regardless of the consequences to myself. As she spoke, she subtly shifted her grip on Zephyr's Edge, preparing for what she was about to attempt. The blade seemed to respond to her intent, the runes along its length glowing more brightly despite the disruption field. The oath is merely a psychological construct, Captain, Veka said dismissively. A self-imposed limitation that you're free to discard when reason demands it. Is it? Alara asked, and in one fluid motion, she flung Zephyr's Edge directly at the disruption device Kalen had indicated. The blade spun through the air with preternatural accuracy, striking the device with its pommel and knocking it off its mounting. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the disruption field collapsed, the blood oath bond surged back to full strength, connecting Alara and Kalen with an intensity that manifested visibly, a brief flash of light that seemed to arc between them. Simultaneously, the containment field holding Kalen and Maris flickered and destabilized. Kalen, seeming to have anticipated this moment, immediately drove his shoulder into the weakened energy barrier, disrupting it further. Maris followed his lead, and together they broke free as the field collapsed completely. Chaos erupted in the Waterheart chamber. Commander Jax drew his weapon and fired at Alara, who dove for cover behind a control console. The technicians abandoned their work some drawing weapons, while others sought shelter from the sudden violence. "Stop them!" Lavina shouted. "Don't let the prince escape!" But Kalen was already moving, retrieving Zephyr's edge from where it had fallen and tossing it back to Alara with remarkable precision. "Captain, the water controls." Understanding instantly, Alara caught her blade and rolled toward the main water distribution nexus, where Lavina and Veka stood. Jax attempted to intercept her, his energy weapon firing repeatedly, but Maris tackled him from behind, disrupting his aim. Veka drew a small energy pistol and aimed it at Alara, but hesitated a moment of uncertainty that proved costly. Alara reached the nexus, and with a powerful swing of Zephyr's edge, severed the connections between the Technomancer devices and Arden's water systems. Sparks flew as the incompatible technologies separated violently. Alarms began to sound throughout the chamber as the Waterheart's automatic protection systems detected the breach and began emergency shutdown procedures. "What have you done?" Lavina demanded, backing away from the failing systems. "Do you have any idea how delicate that integration was?" "I have some idea," Alara replied, advancing on the Chancellor with Zephyr's edge raised. "Enough to know that your technology and our traditions don't mix well literally or figuratively." The chamber was now in complete disarray. Jax and Maris were locked in hand-to-hand combat. The technicians were fleeing, and Kalen had managed to secure a weapon from one of them, which he now trained on Veka. "It's over, Chancellor," Alara stated firmly. "Your attack has failed. Your Technomancer has been captured. Your attempt to control our water systems has been thwarted. Surrender now before more lives are lost needlessly." For a moment it seemed Lavina might comply. Then, with startling speed, she produced a device from within her robes, something similar to Soren's disruptor, but more compact, and seemingly more powerful. "You understand nothing, Captain," she hissed, activating the device. "This was never just about Arden's water, or your precious blade. It was about the future of Caldara itself." The device emitted a high-pitched whine, different from Soren's disruptor, but clearly related technology. Instead of causing pain, however, it seemed to target Zephyr's edge directly. The runes along the blade flickered erratically, and Alara felt a strange pulling sensation, as if the device was attempting to draw something out of the ancestral weapon. "Energy extractor," Kalen called out in warning. "She's trying to drain the blade's traditional power." Alara felt the connection to her blade weakening, along with the blood oath bond itself. Lavina's device was somehow interfering with the very spiritual foundation of both, threatening to sever connections that had existed for generations. In desperation, Alara did the only thing she could think of. She charged forward, driving Zephyr's edge directly toward the extraction device. As blade met technology, a blinding flash of energy erupted between them. The chamber shook with the release of contained power, knocking everyone off their feet. When Alara's vision cleared, she found herself sprawled on the floor, Zephyr's edge still clutched in her hand, but now dormant, its runes dark, for the first time since she had inherited it. Across from her, Lavina lay motionless, the extraction device in pieces around her. "Alara," Kalen's voice, filled with concern. He was at her side in an instant, helping her to sit up. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she replied, though she felt strangely hollow, as if something vital had been temporarily drained from her. "The blade It's intact, Kalen assured her, examining Zephyr's edge. But whatever Lavina's device was attempting it, seems to have temporarily disrupted the traditional energies within it. Nearby, Maris had subdued Commander Jax and was securing him with restraints taken from one of the fallen technicians. Counselor Veka stood with her back against the wall, her earlier confidence replaced by grim resignation. "The Waterheart?" Alara asked, struggling to her feet with Kalen's assistance. Functioning normally," Kalen reported, glancing at the main control panel. "The emergency systems prevented any permanent damage. Once the Technomancer devices are fully removed, everything should return to normal operation." Alara nodded, relieved. Then her attention turned to Chancellor Lavina, who was beginning to stir. "And what of you, Chancellor? What happens now that your grand plan has failed?" Lavina's laugh was bitter as she pushed herself up to a sitting position. "Failed? Is that what you think, Captain? This was merely one approach of many. The technologies we've developed continue to advance with or without your cooperation. Tradition is dying on Caldara, replaced by necessity and innovation. You've won today, but the future belongs to those who adapt, not those who cling to ancient ways." "Perhaps," Alara acknowledged, "but adaptation doesn't have to mean abandonment. Our traditions have survived on Caldara for generations because they serve a purpose beyond mere ceremony. They bind us together, remind us of our shared humanity, guide our actions when mere survival might push us toward barbarism." "Pretty words," Lavina dismissed. "But words don't secure water or defend cities." "No," Kalen interjected, "but they inspire the people who do those things. Your technological solutions may seem more efficient in the short term, Chancellor, but they lack the foundation of community and shared purpose that traditions provide. Without that foundation, they'll ultimately fail." Before Lavina could respond, the chamber door burst open. Counselor Drav entered with a squad of Stormguard soldiers, Technician Soren in custody among them. "Captain, thank the ancestors," Drav exclaimed.